Yo, what's up, Core Chronicles fam? It's time for another mind-blowing what if that's gonna leave you on the edge of your seat. Today, we're diving into a fiery crossover. What if Deku made a deal with the devil to save his mother? In this alternate universe, tragedy strikes young Izuku Midoriya, pushing him to make an unthinkable choice. To save his mother's life, Deku strikes a deal with the devil, inheriting the terrifying powers of the Ghost Rider. Armed with hellfire and an unquenchable thirst for justice, Deku becomes a hero unlike any other, walking the line between vengeance and redemption. With his new powers, he faces off against villains, heroes, and even his own inner demons. If you're ready for a story filled with intense action, emotional stakes, and Deku like you've never seen before, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with your fellow anime fans. Alright, let's fire it up and dive into this crossover chaos. It's best you give up. The room sank into a heavy silence for several seconds while a child of just 4 years watched the doctor in front of him with a mask of shock carved into the rock. At his side, his mother looked at him with concern before speaking to the doctor. "Doctor, you mean there's something wrong?" Every other child at his kindergarten has manifested, but Izuku still hasn't. The doctor sighed before explaining the reason why Izuku had not yet shown any quirk, talking about how those who possessed no quirk had 2 joints in the pinky toe, while those who possessed a quirk had an extra joint. However, in spite of his shocked expression and his eyes glued to the doctor, Izuku was not listening to anything that was being said, the man's words still echoing in his mind. "I don't have a quirk? I can't be a hero." A thunderous laugh echoed in his mind with the image of an imposing man with blonde hair and a wide smile. "I can't be like All Might." His small hands balled into fists, without even realizing he had dropped his action figure of All Might. He was so taken by his thoughts that he did not hear his mother's question until she put a hand on his shoulder, surprising him slightly. What? Honey, are you okay?" asked his mother with a concerned look. "Probably he is still shocked by the news, ma'am. You just have to give him some time, but now I need to talk to you privately about your condition," said the doctor with a knowing look. Inko sighed with a sad look, then forced a smile on her lips. "Honey, can you wait for mommy in the waiting room? Please? I have to speak for a moment with the doctor, and then we will go and buy the ingredients to make a good katsudan for dinner, okay?" Nodding absently, Izuku put his shoes back on and walked out of the room in silence, his eyes still wide open in shock, but with his mouth closed in a thin line. With heavy steps, he went and sat on a chair in the small waiting room, barely noticing that he was the only one in that room. Or so he thought. "What's bothering you, young one?" asked a calm male voice to his right, startling him. Looking at the owner of the voice with frightened eyes, the little kid calmed himself at seeing that it was only a man wearing a black cloak and dark gloves and carrying a silver cane with a glass skull on its tip. The man was probably in his late 40s and his blonde hair was elegantly combed. Shifting his attention to the calm blue eyes of the man, Izuku immediately looked away, slightly frightened by those eyes. "The doctor told me I do not have a quirk," said Izuku, looking at the floor with tears forming at the edge of his eyes. "I can't be a hero. MHIC. Indeed, in the world in which we live, not having a quirk can be incredibly disadvantageous." The man nodded before tapping the floor with his cane. "You look like a smart child, so let me ask you something. Do you think there is only one way to get a quirk?" Izuku looked at him with confused eyes, his young mind trying to understand those words. He was only a child, without quirk and definitely weaker than all his peers. But his mind was already sharp enough to notice the subliminal message hidden in that question. The man was not old but not young either, so he had to have some experience with quirks. So the answer to his question was only one. "There are more?" The man smiled at Izuku. "Yes, there are more ways to get a quirk. The most common way is to get it from your parents at the age of 4, or develop a completely new type of quirk, always around that age. However, what many scientists and doctors ignore is that there are other means to obtain a quirk. In fact, there are quirks that can be passed down from owner to a new owner as if they were a simple object, but there are also special quirks that can give quirk to other people. The list goes on. Izuku looked at him in awe, his previous shock now forgotten. "Do you mean that I can get a quirk too?" The blonde man chuckled a bit. "Of course you can. You just need to find a way to obtain such power for yourself. I am sure that, in due course, you will gain an incredibly powerful quirk." Izuku's face lit up like a Christmas tree, and, Jumping up, he bowed to the man, thanking him for his words as his mother had taught him. His mother had also taught him not to talk to strangers, but Izuku had easily forgotten that warning. "Honey, why are you bowing?" came the voice of his mother as she walked to him with a confused face. I was thanking this, mister," said Izuku, but his face changed from happy to confused as soon as he took notice of the fact that the man was gone. But his confusion was short-lived because the kid turned to his mother and showed her a huge smile. "Mommy, I can be a hero too. I can get a quirk." Inko smiled sadly at her son, thinking that his words were a simple way to face his newly discovered status of quirkless. Shaking her head, she took his hand, walking toward the exit while talking to him with sweet words so as not to ruin his mood. "I'm sure you will succeed, honey. Now, let's move. We have to prepare dinner." "Yes, cat's it on for dinner," shouted Izuku with a huge smile. Neither he nor his mother noticed the blonde man sitting in the waiting room with a cold smile on his lips, his facial features slowly turning into those of a demon. Midoriya's house, / 3 days later. "He's smiling. He always smiles," mumbled Izuku, looking a video of All Might where his favorite hero was saving the victims of an accident. Nodding to himself, the little kid looked at a notebook next to the screen, currently open on the first page where there were few simple words. "Find a powerful quirk. I just have to find a way to get it, and then I can become like All Might," thought the kid before leaving the room to get a glass of water. Going down the stairs leading to the entrance, he noticed that the clock hanging on the wall marked midnight on the dot. "Is it already so late? I had not noticed it," thought Izuku, looking at the clock. "Why Mom did not come to call me? Usually she gets angry if I stay up late." When he was at the base of the stairs, he saw that the television in the living room was still on, and upon peering into the room, he noticed his mother sleeping on the couch. The woman seemed calm, but her face was not at all, and it seemed to worry Izuku, who had always seen her smiling, at least before the discovery of his lack of quirk. Walking towards the television to turn it off, so as not to wake his mother, the kid saw a letter on the floor between the couch and the coffee table. Curiosity immediately got the better of him, and Izuku took it in his hands, but found himself faced with a series of words of which he ignored the meaning. He was still a 4-year-old boy after all. This is the name of the doctor, thought Izuku, understanding a word every once in a while. "I don't understand. What is this, quirk cancer? If it's in a letter with the doctor's name, maybe it's something important." Deciding to understand what that letter was about, Izuku left the living room in silence and went back to the study with the computer still on, quickly typing the words that seemed important, such as quirk cancer, and what he found froze the blood in his veins. Discovered 5 years after the first quirk, this cancer manifests itself in quirk holders without distinction. There are no signs that can make the patient aware of its presence, except when it is too late. Izuku gulped loudly, his hand trembling on the mouse. To date, there are more than 1 million victims, and there has not yet been a cure for this type of cancer. Not even the quirks of the most famous doctors in the world seem able to counter this disease, and dozens of scientists are still working on a cure, as gifted with a life of its own. His fingers slowly scrolled down the page, and the last words of the paragraph stopped his heart. Rate of lethality, 100%. Playground near Midoriya's house, / a couple of days later. "Hey, did you hear? Apparently Deku has no quirk," said a kid, snickering while he and other kids were playing among them. The others looked at Izuku, sitting not far from them by himself, before starting to snicker like their playmate. "Was not he who said that he wanted to become like All Might?" asked a second kid with bat wings. "Yeah, now he can't even become a hero." "Oh well, he's always been weak, isn't it, Kakin?" asked a third with long purple hair, looking at their blonde playmate who just joined them after having been praised for his quirk by some parents. Said kid looked at Izuku with an unreadable face before shrugging. "Who cares? If he's weak, then it doesn't matter to me. Let's go play heroes and villains." And the other kids shouted in approval before following the blonde kid, leaving Izuku completely alone. However, what they could not know was that Izuku was staring at the ground with a dull look, not because of his quirkless, but because of what he had discovered about his mother, namely that she was sick with an incurable disease. After discovering the existence of that disease, Izuku had put the letter back in place in order to not worry his mother, but as soon as she woke up, he had noticed how Inko was less alive than usual. For a child like him, it had been a far worse shot than finding out that he did not have any quirk. In addition, the thought of being without a mother for the rest of his life had made its way into his mind, leading him to not sleep for several hours, in the grip of an unsustainable anxiety. "I see that even today you are morally on the ground, young Izuku," said a male voice to his right, making him nearly jump out of his skin. "Why you?" Izuku asked with wide, open eyes, seeing the same blonde man sitting on the bench. Right next to him. "Why are you here?" "Wait, how do you know my name?" "I never told you." The man showed a little smile. "I like walking during the day when I have no commitments. As I passed through here, I noticed you sitting there alone, but you were so taken by your thoughts that you did not hear me coming. As for the name, I went to the same doctor as you the other day, and he was still filling in documents about you, and I got to read your name." Oh, I see. Sorry about that," mumbled Izuku, looking back at the ground. "Judging by your face, I can imagine that something terrible happened," said the man, looking at Izuku. "Does it concern the fact of not having a quirk?" Izuku shook his head slowly. "I'm looking for a way to get a quirk, but my mom," he sniffed a couple of times, "she's sick, and her illness cannot be cured." The man nodded solemnly, looking back in front of him. "Quirk cancer, right?" Izuku looked at him in surprise. "How dash? In this world, there is only one disease that cannot be cured using the countless existing quirks, and that is the quirk cancer. It's really a terrible disease," explained the blonde man, tapping the ground with his cane. "The thing about cancer is the time it takes, the toll on loved ones, lives that are altered, plans that have to be changed." He looked down at Izuku, who was staring at him carefully. "Izuku, what if I could help your mother?" Izuku's eyes almost fell out of their sockets. "Why, you can? But on the internet it is said that nobody knows a cure." "That's true, but it is also said that no doctor or scientist has succeeded in finding it. There is no mention of anyone outside those two branches of research," said the man with a small smile. "The truth is that there are some quirks in this world that could be of great help to humanity, but the people who possess them do not come forward for fear of being targeted by unwanted people, and fortunately for you, I am one of those people." "Really? Your quirk can help my mom?" shouted Izuku with eyes filled with tears. "Of course I can. In fact, I can also give you a quirk," nodded the blonde man with a strange smile, bringing out a scroll. "However, in order for my quirk to work properly, you have to pay a price." Izuku gulped loudly, looking at the scroll. He could feel his heart beating wildly at the idea of having a quirk and being able to save his mother. But everything had a price. What's the price?" "Oh, I'll take." The man looked around for a moment before focusing again on Izuku. "Your soul." The deafening noise of his heart stopped abruptly. "My soul. Are you going to eat it?" "Oh, hell no," chuckled the man with a smile. "To put it simply, by sunrise tomorrow, your mother will be healthy as a horse, and you will have your whole life ahead of you with a new powerful quirk. In exchange for this, I will come back to you in the future to collect the favor. You will not have to do anything complicated, I guarantee you. You'll just have to help me with something when the time comes. It's your choice, Izuku." He unrolled the scroll, handing it to Izuku. "All you have to do is sign." With hesitation, Izuku took the scroll in his hands to read its contents, but suddenly something opened a cut on his finger, making him wince due to the pain. Without realizing it, he dropped the scroll while a few drops of blood dripped onto it. Alarmed by the incident, Izuku quickly picked it up, apologizing infinitely with the man. "Oh, it doesn't matter, young Izuku," said the man with a little smile. Looking at the blood dripped on the signature line, "This will do just fine." Izuku tilted the head, showing confusion on his face. "But I did not sign it. Your blood did it for you, and when you grow up, you will learn that a contract signed with blood is worth 1,000 times a contract signed with ink," said the man, putting away the scroll. "Now, go home and help your mother, because this is the last day where you'll see her in such a bad shape. From tomorrow, she will be even healthier than before." Hearing that news so hoped for, Izuku seemed to forget about the contract and started running towards his house with a big smile on his lips, only to stop suddenly, turning on his heels. "Hey, mister, what is your name?" The child stood still, confused to see the empty bench and no sign of the man. Maybe it was a dream, he thought, but as he saw the cut on his finger, he shook his head. "No, that wasn't a dream. Now my mom will recover." And with that, he ran towards the house, unaware of two red eyes intent on staring at him from afar, adorned by a sinister grin. Midoriya's house / the next morning. Slowly opening his eyes, Izuku let himself go to a long yawn as the sunlight filtered through the shutters of his window. However, after a few seconds, he frowned in confusion as he heard music echoing throughout the house. Coming out of bed, he slipped on the All Might-themed slippers and left the room, heading for the kitchen, the room where the music came from. Entering the room, Izuku gasped as he watched his mother humming the song as she cooked the breakfast with one of the biggest smiles of all time. Mom! Upon hearing his voice, Inko turned to her son and, in record time, caught him in a big hug, whirling around in joy. "Good morning, honey," said Inko, smiling at her son. "I have some wonderful news to tell you." Seeing his confused look, she giggled before placing him on a chair. "Honey, as you probably noticed, I was not very well these days." She placed a hand over her heart. "There was a bad thing inside me that was hurting me, but now that bad thing is gone." Izuku widened his eyes, his mouth wide open. "Really?" "Yes. I took the morning test prescribed by the doctor to monitor that bad thing, and I discovered that it completely disappeared," explained Inko, hugging him. "Now you don't have to worry about me. I'm completely fine. It worked. It really worked," mumbled Izuku, looking at his mother without thinking about his words as Inko tilted her head with a confused look. "What worked, honey?" And nothing, Mom. Nothing," said Izuku, shaking his arms to prove his points. "I was just talking to myself." Inko raised an eyebrow, but decided not to ask questions so as not to ruin the atmosphere. Kissing him on the forehead, she walked towards the stove. "Get ready, because after breakfast we'll go shopping." "Okay, Mom." Izuku nodded with a smile without a care. His mother was healed, and that was all that mattered. As said by Inko, after breakfast they went to the city center to buy some things, and the happiness of Izuku grew even more when he received the official diary of All Might, where they wrote some of his most famous phrases as well as a lot of information on his heroic deeds. But all this faded compared to the idea of having received a powerful quirk from that blonde man, according to their agreement. "Now I just have to find out what my quirk is so I can start practicing to become the best hero ever," thought Izuku with a huge smile while shaking with excitement. "Wait here for a moment, honey," said Inko, tapping him on the shoulder. "I'm gonna get the car and then we go home, okay?" Izuku nodded before sitting on a bench with the shopping bags, looking at his mother as she wailed down the market street on the sidewalk. Her back was the last thing he saw of his mother before a violent explosion erupted from a store, swallowing her in a fraction of a second and destroying everything within a 30-foot radius. The following shock wave threw him and all the civilians on the ground, causing him to slam his head against the concrete of the sidewalk. As the screams of the people echoed in the air, Izuku tried to get up, shaking on his legs with a clouded vision as a trickle of blood dripped from his forehead. Looking around, he saw only blurred figures running in all directions, mostly trying to get away from a strong light source not far from him. When he turned to that light, his vision became clearer, allowing him to see the flames that were slowly devouring the street and the buildings. But above all, he saw what was left of at least 50 people, now reduced to charred skeletons. His mother's back, as she walked away from him, came back vividly in his mind as tears began to run down his cheeks. Without realizing it, Izuku took a step forward, but someone grabbed him by the shirt, lifting his little body off the ground. In an instant, he found himself face to face with a boy in his late teens with white hair. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" shouted the boy. "We need to evacuate the area." "Are you alone?" Normally, Izuku would have been delighted to have just met Death Arms, one of the pro-heroes of the new generation, but his mind was unable to process anything that was happening around him. So he turned back to look at the flames, stretching his arms forward. "Mom." Death Arms widened his eyes, looking at the flames while hearing the broken voice of the green-haired child he had just stopped, intent on calling his mother. "Shit!" Without wasting time, he picked up Izuku and began to run with the rest of the crowd, heading for the police sirens that were getting closer and closer, while the little kid weakly tried to free himself from the grip of the hero. "Mom! My mom! Where is she?" screamed Izuku, trying to reach those flames without thinking, as the image of Inko in his mind was slowly burning down. "Mom! Mom!" Izuku closed his eyes, missing the little flames dancing around his fingers, but when he screamed again, his voice was different, more hoarse and powerful, sending a shiver down Death Arms' back. "MOM, Jitendo Hospital, Tokyo, / the next morning. So you are the one who will take care of him?" "Yes, I arrived as soon as possible. I'm not a relative of blood, but I've filled out all the forms. You will have to sign others once he has come to live with you," Then there is also the fact of Inko Midoriya's will. Those problems can wait. I want to first make sure Izuku is okay. Fine, just try not to do stupid things. Your criminal record is not clean, and you know it well. I know. Jeez. You're even worse than those cops in America. I'll take that as a compliment. Now wait, he's waking up? Izuku opened his eyes slowly, finding himself facing a completely white ceiling. Where? Someone placed a hand on his shoulder, catching his attention. Looking at his left, he saw a young man with black hair dressed like a policeman. Don't worry, you're fine. We are in a hospital. Do you feel any pain right now? Izuku stood still for a few seconds, but then he whispered, My head. You took a bad blow to the head. Nothing serious, but the doctors say that you will have a bit of a headache for a day or two, at least if you will not be healed by some quirk. Explained the policeman with a little smile. My name is Naomi Tsukauchi, and I'm the one who brought you here urgently yesterday, after Death Arms handed you over to the police. I know I ask you a lot, especially now that you've woken up. But do you remember something before you fainted? Izuku looked at him with confusion written on his face. But then the memories of the day before bombarded his mind, forcing him to hold his head in pain. An explosion. And my mom. He looked up at the policeman. My mom? Where is my mom? Naomesa looked at him with sad eyes, not knowing how to give him the tragic news. He was just a kid after all. Izuku, I'm sorry to say this, but your mom is dead. She was killed in yesterday's attack by some villains. The heroes defeated and arrested them, but there was nothing to do for the people too close to the origin of the explosion. Predictably, Izuku seemed to die at that moment, crying uncontrollably and calling his mother's name in vain. Naomesa did not know how to console him without turning out to be a cold and heartless person, but it was at that moment that the third person in that room decided to speak. You really know how to talk to a child. Come on, stand aside, said a young male voice as the newcomer sat down next to the bed, hugging Izuku, who continued to cry uncontrollably for several minutes while the new person whispered something in his ear. Come on, kid. This is not the time to cry, you know? You must be strong like a hero. No, not like a hero, but like the best hero. Like All Might? He's your idol, right? Still crying. Izuku managed to nod once, shaking in the man's arms. Said man smiled a bit, before asking, Then you will know what distinguishes him from the other heroes, is not it? Izuku nodded again. He always smiles. Yes, he always smiles because he knows he must always be strong, and those who can smile in the hardest moments are the strongest of all, said the man, patting him on the back. Now, I can't ask you to smile, not after what happened, but I need you to be strong. Can you do this for me? Izuku sobbed again for a few minutes before he could calm down enough to stop crying. Slowly, the man let him go, and Izuku could look him in the face, noticing his reddish blonde hair and his blue eyes, but above all the black biker jacket. Glad to see that you're a strong kid, Izuku, said the man, smiling at him. My name is Jonathan Blaze, but you can call me Johnny. I was a friend of your mother, and from today on I'll be your caretaker. Warning, for the purposes of the story, Izuku will be 1 year older than the canon. This chapter will explain why he will still be in the same generation as Bakugo and the others. OHI, Izuku, wake up. Time to go to school. After a low groan, two tired green eyes opened in the now lost quiet of the room, looking at the ceiling for several seconds. Although reluctantly, Izuku pushed back the blanket and put his feet on the floor, trying to wake up with light pats on the cheeks while also showing his naked torso and well-defined muscles gained in recent years. At the age of 15, almost 16, Izuku was a boy definitely tall for his age, reaching almost 1.75 meters, with a physique that many girls would have surely defined as ripped. Walking towards the window, he stopped just to raise the shutters, groaning again as soon as the sun blinded him momentarily, but once he took a shirt resting on the back of the chair in his room, he walked towards the kitchen. Walking down the stairs, he took a quick look at the pictures hanging on the wall, all of them showing Izuku during his growth and the man who had been taking care of him for almost 12 years. Johnny Blaze. The older man had become a set of figures for Izuku, assuming the role of guardian but also of father, friend, and older brother, all for the sake of his protege, and for that, Izuku was more than grateful. Well, look who decided to come out of the grave, said a mocking male voice as soon as he set foot in the kitchen. Spend another night in the throes of your heartburns? Or did you spend the night going around on your motorcycle, Again, Izuku snorted at that before taking a cup and filling it with coffee, then sitting at the table with Johnny. The heartburns were a joking definition used between them to indicate a part of Izuku's quirk that, even after 12 years, did not have a name, yet nor did they know all its effects. Days after losing his mother, Izuku had begun to experience severe pains in his chest during different times of the day, as if something were burning inside him. But at night the pains became even stronger. No doctor had been able to discover the origins of those pains, or a way to suppress them, and as the days went by, the pains had become stronger and stronger, leading Izuku to develop a strong pain tolerance. After almost a full year, the pains did not hurt him as before, but they led him to spend many sleepless nights. That had led Johnny to remove Izuku from the kindergarten for a whole year, so as to be sure of his health, and consequently, Izuku had found himself in the same class as Katsuki Bakugo, a child who had made fun of him several times due to his lack of quirk. During their second year together, they had discovered another aspect of his quirk, namely the possibility of melting things, especially metal objects. Johnny still had nightmares about it since the first thing Izuku had melted was the muffler of an all-original 1957 Harley-Davidson Sportster. The desperate scream of the man had been heard throughout the city, and Izuku had had a panic attack in seeing his guardian on the ground with white eyes and foam coming out of his mouth. Although, thinking back to the episode, now Izuku could not help but chuckle. For another 2 years, they had not discovered anything new about his quirk, but one evening, during a dinner with the newly promoted detective Naomi Sakachi, who had become a family friend, they had come to the conclusion that whenever Izuku felt those heartburns, a villain was at work somewhere. None of them knew how to explain it, but apparently Izuku knew about it when someone was committing illegal actions, albeit in a somewhat painful way. However, everything changed one night when Izuku was only 14 years old. Flashback. Johnny's motorcycle shop, /2 years ago. Izuku yawned slightly, flipping through the pages of an old motorcycle magazine. His caretaker shop was empty at that time of the evening, but Izuku liked spending time there, even just to look at the magazines he had read so many times. After discovering that Johnny was a former stunt motorcycle rider, a very good one by the way, Izuku was not surprised to find out that he had decided to open a motorcycle shop in Tokyo, although not in the city center, but rather close to the residential area. All his doubts about it had vanished a few days after the opening, when he had seen many customers in the store asking for things about new motorcycles, spare parts, and so on. And all this had done nothing but stir up his curiosity about the world of motorcycles, leading him to ask for information from Johnny. Now, Johnny was a lot of things, and Encyclopedia on Motorcycles was one of them, definitely. After almost 3 hours of conversation, Izuku found himself drawn to that world, and over the course of months, he had started spending more and more time there learning new things about motorcycles. He knew how they were made, how to disassemble them, how to repair them, and also how to drive them thanks to Johnny's secret lessons. All he needed was a bike of his own, but for that he had to wait to be 16. "I see you've grown since the last time we met," said a male voice, scaring Izuku to death, and only out of sheer luck, he did not throw the magazine in the face of the man who had spoken. "Why you?" almost shouted Izuku, looking at the same blonde man, currently standing near the entrance with the cane in his hands. "Hello, Izuku. It's been a while." The young boy calmed down a bit, seeing him. "Yeah, almost 10 years. That long? Seems that my commitments in America took me longer than expected," said the man with a little smile before nodding to Izuku. "I heard about your mother. You have my most sincere condolences." "Thank you," said Izuku with sad eyes at the thought of his mother, before asking, "Are you here for the contract?" "Yes and no," said the man, confusing him. "You see, I can feel that in the next few years I will be forced to collect a favor with you, but I fear that coming to you suddenly might be counterproductive. After all, you have barely discovered some small aspects of your quirk. About that, can you explain something? Because melting things and knowing when the villains are acting does not seem like such a powerful quirk," said Izuku, sounding a little irritated. "Rightly so. I'm sorry, but I cannot explain everything about your quirk, but I can still give you the basics," chuckled the man, tapping the cane on the ground. "You must know that you are not the only one who has signed a contract with me, and every time the quirk that I give changes in some aspects, but the base is the same. First of all, your body was too immature when you received the quirk, so it just gave you little tastings of its power. Now that I am here, I will make sure that your body matures quickly, so in a few years you will be more than ready to use it to the best of your ability." The man showed Izuku a little smile, making him shiver under those eyes. "But tonight, since you had to endure that pain within you for 10 years, I will make sure that you can eliminate the source of such pain." Izuku looked at him with eyes full of confusion and fear, but then his mind understood the words of the man. "Wait, who told you about my Pyugh?" A sudden stab of pain in the chest caused him to fall on his knees, his eyes now filled with pain and difficulty in breathing. "Can you feel it, Izuku? Your power is trying to get out, and it would not be healthy to keep him inside of you. You must hurry if you do not want to suffer further," the man said with a smile, but when Izuku looked up, he was already gone. Rising with difficulty, Izuku tried to get to the phone of the store, but his legs moved by themselves, instead approaching a motorcycle not far away, a Kawasaki Ninja 400 completely black ready to go and kept on display for customers. Upon touching it with one hand, Izuku was surprised to hear the engine start up as if it had its own life, and before he could realize it, he had already climbed into the saddle with the hands clasped around the hand grips. With a rapid acceleration, the bike moved by itself and shattered the shop window, while Izuku tried in every way not to lose the grip on the handlebars of the bike, closing his eyes to avoid the shards of glass that opened small cuts on his face. Accelerating more and more, the bike drove to the edge of the residential area, bordering the industrial zone, full of warehouses and factories. Izuku then tried to turn the handlebars to change the road, but the bike slipped into a large warehouse without gates and without any warning braked sharply, sending Izuku forward with a somersault that ended with his back against the concrete of the floor, knocking the air out of his lungs. Izuku suppressed a lament, his eyes closed with pain, but when he opened them again, smoke began to come out of them, alarming him. Standing up in spite of the pain that had become even stronger, he put his hands over the eyes to try to soothe that unbearable feeling of burning, but to his utmost fear, he noticed that even his hands were smoking and looking sewn. His fear grew in seeing violent flames wrapping around his feet, leaving flaming footprints every time he took a step forward despite his body shaken by violent spasms. With the passing of seconds, the burning sensation was transmitted throughout the body and the pain became unbearable, leading Izuku to scream at full lungs as bright red veins began to appear on his hands and the rest of his body. The pain soon led to a kind of hysteria, and Izuku began to laugh and scream at the same time, looking helpless as his muscles were burned from the inside, and with every little spasm of his hands, pieces of skin were charred, showing white and immaculate bones wrapped in flames. His eyes, now completely dissolved and replaced by those very flames, looked around for something that could help, ignoring his hair as they were devoured by the flames as well as the rest of his body. The pain continued to grow, but after a last violent spasm, Izuku stiffened, looking down while the last piece of skin was burned. He stood in that position for several seconds, then slowly raising his head, now reduced to a flaming skull. An inhuman roar echoed in the night air. Tokyo suburbs / a few minutes after. "Come on, old man. We just need some cash. Do not you want to do a good deed?" asked a man with four arms and long black hair, looking at the little form of an old man with blue skin in front of him. "I have nothing to give to criminals like you," shouted the old man before being punched in the face by the multi-armed man. The blow made him stagger to a second delinquent who turned his right forearm into a spring, hitting him in the face and knocking him down at the feet of the third and last member of their group, who looked at the man with a grin on his face. "You should be kinder, old man. We young people really need money, do you know?" Therefore, he made a strange noise with his throat and then spit a ball of fire that hit a waste bin, burning it in a few seconds. "Give us your money or you'll be in big trouble." Before the old man could reply, a violent roaring noise echoed in the air, surprising him and the three thugs. Sensing the origin of the sound, the three delinquents turned towards a tunnel not far from them, from which one could glimpse a light getting closer and closer. In a few moments, what appeared to be a simple light turned out to be a vehicle enveloped in flames that literally flew over their heads, forcing them to duck down so as not to be hit, before landing behind them, creating a small explosion that threw pieces of asphalt and ground into the air. The three delinquents immediately turned to the point of the impact while the old man fell to the ground in shock, still uncertain about what had happened. With the thinning of the smoke created during the impact, a figure began to appear, and the three men felt a sensation of fear and terror nestling in the deepest corners of their souls. Standing just 10 meters from them, there was what could only be described as a demonic motorbike and its rider, both wrapped in hellfire. The bike seemed to be made entirely of black steel, but with parts that looked like human bones, like the spokes of the wheels shaped like blades and the handlebars that were the horns of an infernal goat skull, while the rest of the skull was in place of the headlight, with flames burning fiercely in its sockets. The engine looked like a ribcage from which protruded four iron pipes that stretched to the rear wheel, becoming four mufflers with strange glowing incisions on them. Both wheels, completely in flames, were covered by fenders that seemed to have been created by spines, with a small curved blade for each vertebra. Sitting on the seat of the motorcycle, however, there was a flaming skeleton wearing a black hoodie, jeans of the same color, and red shoes. Slowly turning his head, the skeleton stared at the three delinquents, sending another shiver down their backs. With absolute calm, the skeleton got off the bike, revealing to be lower than expected, but no less threatening, and, without deigning the three men of a second look, he looked at the old man still on the ground who was trembling with fear. With a quick tilt of the head, the skeleton pointed to the houses not far away and, grasping the meaning of that gesture, the old man stood up with uncertainty, stammering a low "thank you," before running in that direction, leaving the skeleton alone with the three men. The one with four arms was the first to recover, immediately showing a big grin. "Well, I've seen some ugly people, but you're certainly one of the ugliest. Your appearance surprised us so much that the old man managed to escape. It means that you will replace him. I hope your money is fireproof, because we really need it." Without waiting for an answer, the man approached the skeleton and tried to grab the hoodie with one of his hands, but the skeleton grabbed his wrist without even looking and, with a quick pressure, broke it cleanly. The man's mind did not have time to register the pain that the skeleton hit him with a violent fist in the belly, burning his skin and making him fall to his knees. Before his two comrades could intervene, the skeleton grabbed the delinquent by the throat, forcing the man to look at him. And after raising his right hand showing a sphere of fire, he used it to hit the face of the man who, under the terrified eyes of the other two, was completely burnt to ashes within a second. The other two were paralyzed by fear, but the second delinquent ran forward, turning both forearms into springs, and then trying to hit the skeleton from the distance, taking advantage of the strength of his quirk. His plan failed miserably as soon as the skeleton succeeded in grasping both the springs before the two fists could hit him. The man tried to free himself, but his vain attempts ended when the skeleton melted both springs, effectively amputating the hands of the man, who fell to the ground screaming in the grip of a pain never felt before while looking at the cauterized stumps he had in place of the wrists. Not paying attention to the screams of the man, the skeleton turned to the last thug left just in time to be hit in the face by a ball of fire. The man grinned mockingly, thinking he had hurt him somehow, but his expression changed into a mask of terror as soon as he saw that the skeleton had not been minimally affected by his fire. "You like playing with fire?" asked the skeleton, looking at him. "Let's play." The man took a few steps back before running away at breakneck speed. "Stay away from me." The skeleton did not immediately pursue him, but picked up a piece of cement from the ground that was immediately covered with red veins. Aiming at the man on the run, the skeleton flung the fragment that exploded in contact with the man's back, causing him to fall to the ground screaming in pain. Seeing the man on the ground, the skeleton took a few steps towards him, only to notice a small ironmongery. Entering the shop, the skeleton looked around until he saw a series of chains hanging from the ceiling, and, after grabbing one, he ripped it off the hook. Walking out of the shop with the chain dangling from his fist, he saw that the third man was trying to crawl away with his back completely burned, and what was left of his clothes was now melted with his skin. The skeleton reached him with a few steps, and upon hearing him coming, the man turned slowly with eyes full of terror, just in time to see the skeleton stretch the chain in his hands, igniting it instantly. "Have mercy." "Sorry," said the skeleton, shaking his head all out of mercy. With a wide arm movement, the skeleton released the chain behind him as a small part wrapped around his arm. Realizing his intentions, the man tried again to escape, but found himself immediately blocked by the chain now tied around his chest. A loud scream came from his throat as the flames of the chain began to devour his body. Somebody, help me! His scream ceased when the skeleton jerked the chain, reducing the man to a pile of ashes that was dispersed by the wind. The chain went off at that moment, and with a simple gesture of the arm, the skeleton wrapped it around his chest twice, then started to walk towards the bike, ignoring the man to whom he had torn off his hands, which was still on the ground, intent to look at the skeleton with eyes full of tears and a big dark stain in his pants. His fear, however, reached new heights when the skeleton, back on his bike, made it skid for a few seconds, pointing the front wheel at him. "No, no, no, no," shouted the man, trying to get up, but without success. "I don't deserve to die." Everyone says that. Without any hesitation, the skeleton set off at full speed and never slowed down, even when the man's desperate face was only a few inches from his bike's wheel. Johnny's motorcycle shop slashed the next day. Normally, Johnny was a calm person, playful, and also quite lazy for all that was not about motorcycles, but at that moment his mind was working overtime to understand what happened in his shop. Not only one of the windows was shattered, but one of the bikes had disappeared, and the same could be said of Izuku. It was the good time that he decided to install some security camera if he did not die of a heart attack. He had already called Nao Mesa to explain the situation, but the detective told him that, at the time, the police station was in the chaos because of the countless phone calls they were receiving about a series of murders that took place in the city during the night. "I hope you are fine, Izuku, because otherwise I will never be able to find the courage to look at your parents in the eyes when I'll see them again," thought Johnny when the phone in the shop rang, and after not even the first ring, he already had the receiver close to his ear. "Who's calling?" On the other side of the line, he heard a faint chuckle. "Gee, good morning. Izuku, where the hell are you? What happened last night? What happened to the shop? The Kawasaki? Are you fine? Someone kidnapped you," shouted Johnny without thinking at his words. "I'm fine, Johnny. I'm just really tired," said Izuku, sounding really worn out. "I'm somewhere in the countryside outside the city. An old man allowed me to use his phone." Johnny sighed with relief. At least Izuku was fine. "Izuku, what happened last night?" Another faint chuckle. "You would not believe me." In flashback, indeed Johnny had not believed him at first, but the news concerning a flaming skeleton riding a demonic motorcycle, several criminals killed during the night, and Izuku himself who had shown him some powers. Well, let's just say that they had served the purpose to convince him. Of course, despite some witnesses praising the Flaming Centaur, so he had been called by journalists, Izuku had suffered the worst blow by learning to have killed a dozen people without remorse during the night. When he had turned back at sunrise, his memories were confused and unclear, but as the hours passed, he had remembered all the faces of his victims as they begged for mercy. The face of the man to whom he had amputated his hands before investing him with the bike was the decisive drop to make him run to the bathroom, to vomit repeatedly, until his stomach was left empty. Johnny had tried to console him to the best of his ability, but his words had been useless. Only after several hours, when Nao Mesa was present too, Izuku had decided to tell them the whole story, from the contract with that blonde man until the night when he turned into a burning skeleton. To say that they were speechless would have been a euphemism, but at the end of everything, they lived in a world with heroes and villains, so that story could almost pass as normal from a certain point of view. A decidedly sick point of view. Nao Mesa had been inclined to bring Izuku to the station for some questions so as to file the incident as an isolated case of loss of control. But Johnny immediately objected, saying that Izuku already had so much trouble with that damn Quirk and did not need the police, heroes, or villains to breathe on his neck. In the end, they had decided to keep the secret, trying to help Izuku master his Quirk, and that long path that had lasted for 2 years had given many fruits, but unfortunately, "A rapist," said Izuku, sipping his coffee. Johnny nodded with a mouth full of bacon. "This month you're only at 3. I'd say it's a step forward." "If you say so," said Izuku with a sigh. "What's the point of being able to control this Quirk even during the day if at night it acts on its own? I'm sure you'll find a solution. Now go get ready, because I'm not going to take you to school," said Johnny with a little grin. Izuku shook his head with an amused smile and put the cup in the sink before returning to his room to put on the school uniform. The memories of the night just ended were still vivid in his mind, especially the moment when he was burning that rapist before he could hurt a girl. That was a big disadvantage of his quirk because during those 2 years of training, Izuku had managed to control his transformation, managing to use it even during the day, which was impossible before. However, at night, when the villains exceeded a certain limit, his quirk acted alone, making him transform and then take him to the nearest criminal to kill him. Now, Izuku did not kill with pleasure, preferring to use an aspect of his power that he had named Penance Stare, which did not kill but condemned a person in a coma while the mind suffered all the pains that the villain had inflicted on his or her victims for the eternity. The government had even created a new wing for a hospital in Tokyo where the victims of his stare were hospitalized. This led Izuku to think of the worst thing that had happened to him since the first transformation 2 years ago. He had become a vigilante and also a fable to scare children. After the first night in which he had killed at least a dozen villains, the police and the heroes had issued an announcement for Flaming Centaur, the pseudonym with which he was still known, stating that he was wanted for improper use of his quirk and other things related to doing justice alone, labeling him as a vigilante since he had only killed criminals and not innocent people, which was not exactly comforting from Izuku's point of view. Unfortunately for him, after a year his victims had risen to 70, with only 5 cases of criminals ended up in a coma. In the second year, however, Izuku had managed to master his quirk, bringing the number of criminals killed to 90 with over 50 victims ended up in a coma. Only during the second year, the Flaming Centaur's fairy tale was born to scare off bad kids at school, and Izuku didn't really know what to think of that fable. Shaking his head to clear his mind, Izuku put on his uniform jacket and headed for the front door. "I'm going out, Johnny. See you this afternoon," shouted Johnny from the bathroom. Izuku then looked at a photo placed near the door, taken when he was only 3 years old with his mother. Smiling at the photo, he whispered, "I'm going out, Mom. Somewhere in Tokyo / that afternoon. Think about our future." Huh. Thought Izuku while looking at the career aspiration document that the professor had given him at school. If everything had gone on as usual, I probably would have raised my hand to the idea of becoming a hero. For those who really knew Izuku, his mother's death had changed him almost drastically. If before he was practically obsessed with heroes, having a quirk, and, above all might, now he almost never stopped to observe the fights between heroes and villains, and didn't even have the aspiration to become like them, especially after the last 2 years. Obviously, some things like his admiration for All Might had not vanished, but they weren't as before. Probably the best idea would be to go to work in some factory that needed to melt materials. That was one aspect of his quirk that Izuku controlled better. After all, as many had shown, having a quirk did not necessarily mean to be a hero. An example was Johnny with his quirk Second Chance that, once a day, allowed him to nullify the damage received in an accident or things like that. Very useful during his career as a stunt motorcycle rider. With a sigh, he walked into a small tunnel that would take him home, but then he felt a burning sensation in his chest. Not again. At that moment, a large amount of dark slime wrapped him from behind invisibility cloak. Sizel. Izuku turned his head just a little to be able to see 2 big eyes and a series of teeth attached to that slime, while the villain talked about things like hiding for a while and why he was in town. He's trying to take control? Thought Izuku, having already fought against an enemy like this months before. The slime seemed not to notice the eyes of Izuku as they began to burn as well as his right hand. "You've been unlucky. Right now, I do not really have the patience to deal with you." "Do not worry, kid," shouted a deep male voice as a manhole was thrown into the air by a fist, "because I'm here." This time, Izuku widened his eyes in surprise, seeing All Might come out of the manhole. And before he could think of anything, the hero had already charged his right fist. Texas Smash. With the movement of his arm alone, All Might generated a violent shock wave that swept away the slime, but also had the effect of knocking Izuku to the ground, causing him to lose consciousness. Only after a few minutes, he woke up with some light pats on his cheek. "Oh, hey All Might, thank God. You seem to be doing well. This is the most important," said All Might with a smile always present on his face. Izuku looked at him speechless, having not yet realized that he was in the presence of his idol, the hero who more than anyone had inspired him when he was a child. Looking at him, he could not help but think he's always smiling. "Hey All Might, can I ask you something? You know, pro heroes must constantly fight against time and evil," said the hero, bending the legs as if to jump while Izuku took a few steps forward. "With that, I'm counting on you to continue in the future to support me." And with that, he jumped into the sky, reaching an incredible height in a few moments. But he wasn't alone. Feeling a weight on his legs, All Might turned slightly his head and saw Izuku hanging from his ankles. No, what are you doing? Are you crazy or something? I have to ask you something important," shouted Izuku, trying not to lose his grip while his eyelids and cheeks were about to be torn off by the wind. Okay, I understand. Close your eyes and mouth now," said All Might with a little sweat drop before coughing up a few drops of blood shit. After a second, he tilted his body and then swooped down onto the roof of a building, managing not to damage the roof. "That was really creepy," said Izuku on his knees. Driving a motorcycle was one thing, but flying hanging from a hero's ankles was something completely different. Shaking his head to recover, he saw that All Might was about to leave again. "Wait, no, I can't wait," without looking at him, and so Izuku simply asked, "Why do you always smile? Why do I always smile?" repeated All Might, looking at him, before feeling a strange sensation inside him as smoke began to escape from his body. "Damn it, not now. I know it sounds like a rude question, but I wanted to know. You always save people with a smile on your face, no matter what you're going to face." Izuku, who had held his head down until then, slowly raised it. "Years ago, I wanted to be just like you, only to find himself in front of a very thin man with hollow cheeks and eyes sunk in their sockets. What the? You shrunk. Are you some kind of clone or fake of All Might?" The man stared at him for a few seconds in silence, and then opened his mouth, throwing up a lot of blood. "I am All Might." "What? Your voice has even changed. You can't be him. Think of those people in the pool who hold their breath, so as to look more muscular. More or less it is the same thing," said All Might with a calm voice. "This is even more absurd," shouted Izuku, trying to think about something. Anything to say. Sighing, he sat down on the roof. "Why I always smile, huh? Well, as you can see, kid, what is written on the internet is not necessarily true, you know? But you." All Might raised his shirt, showing a horrible scar on his left chest, surrounded by scar tissue and sutures. "This is a wound I got 5 years ago by the attack of a villain. The result? Semi-destruction of my respiratory system and total removal of my stomach. My face is emaciated and haggard, while my eyes are a side effect of repeated surgeries. Currently, I can't work actively as a hero more than about 3 hours a day. That's my limit." Izuku looked at him without knowing what to think, but then his mind focused on some words spoken by All Might 5 years ago, when you fought against Venomous Chainsaw. "I won't let them get me like that anyway," said All Might, raising a fist before looking down. "What I just told you is never publicly disclosed. I will therefore ask not to reveal to anyone, please." When All Might looked at him again, Izuku felt the huge pressure of his gaze. "The symbol of peace, who saves people with a smile. Absolutely. Can't afford to bow to the forces of evil." Seeing Izuku's face, which showed understanding and alarm, he added, "The reason why I always smile and laugh is to fight the fear and pressure that crush me every time I perform a heroic action, as well as instill courage and trust in people who need a symbol of hope." Izuku stood there for several seconds, looking at the roof. I see." He then bowed. "I'm really sorry to have bothered you and discovered your secret. I promise I will not tell anyone. I can say that you're a good kid, so I have no reason to worry," said All Might with a nod before asking, "Why did you want to know why I always smile?" "My fans usually want to know the secrets of my quirk and the like." Izuku suppressed a shudder at the question, preferring to look elsewhere. "When I was 4, I discovered that my mother was sick. Quirk cancer. I was very young, but also very smart, so I looked for information about it and found that the cancer was deadly and incurable." Izuku walked up to the railing of the roof, watching the city as All Might followed him with his eyes. "I had also recently discovered that I had no quirk, so I was desperate. But then something happened, and my mother healed within a night, defeating the cancer." All Might widened his eyes in surprise, before asking, "Your mother was Inko Midoriya?" This time, Izuku was the one surprised. "Did you know her?" All Might shook his head Never met, but I know she was one of the victims during a terrorist attack about 12 years ago. I remember her name because I was one of the heroes to take care of the villains. Moreover, I remember her because when some of her belongings were withdrawn by the police, it was discovered that she had defeated the cancer thanks to the data obtained from a medical device that she used every morning. Unfortunately, due to the explosion, it was not possible to recover the body, so as to discover a possible cure. I was there, whispered Izuku, catching his attention. The last memory I have of her is her back that moves away before being hit by the explosion. I try to get close, thinking of being able to find her, but I was stopped by death arms and then delivered to the police, and from there to the hospital where I met my current guardian. He knew you were my idol, and that you had something different from all the other heroes. Izuku showed a little smile, that you always smile. He also told me that the people who can smile in the most difficult moments are the strongest, but despite his words, I never managed to find my real smile. Yes, sometimes I smile, but never like when I was 4 and watched your old videos on YouTube. The two remained silent for a few seconds. Then All Might asked, "Do you hate me?" Izuku arched an eyebrow. "Why should I hate you? Because my mother died and nobody could save her?" He shook his head, looking back at the city. Perhaps once I hated all the heroes indiscriminately for that reason. But growing up and becoming aware of the dynamics of the terrorist attack, I realized that it made no sense to point the finger at you heroes. Nobody could know. It happened too fast. I know there is a hero, Sir Night Eye. Here he missed the wince from All Might upon hearing that name. He can see in the future, but his power must have different non-public limits. Otherwise, he could have foreseen it, but it did not go that way. All Might looked at him seriously. You're really mature for your age. I'm sure you'll do important things when you grow up, even without a quirk. And missing the face of Izuku, who wanted to correct him, he walked toward the door of the roof. Good luck, kid. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for your mother. Izuku looked at him with a little smile, forgetting about what he wanted to tell him. Thank you. All Might nodded and walked away, closing the door behind him. Well, I gotta hurry and take. Patting his leg, the hero noticed the absence of the 2 bottles where he had imprisoned the slime, and at that moment, he saw an explosion in the distance from a window. This is not true. Not far away / a few minutes later, still in his skinny form, All Might reached the back of a large crowd. Noting the slime he had defeated before destroying the surroundings while trying to absorb the body of a young boy, all while other heroes tried to contain the damage without being able to attack him. He must have fallen at that time. He thought, recalling the moment when the young boy with green hair had hung on his legs and he had been forced to land. I was so absorbed in what I was doing that I didn't see the time pass. What a mistake on my part. All this because I was talking with a fan? I am pathetic. He clenched a hand on his scar. So pathetic. Anyway, this villain, said someone in the crowd. Isn't this the one All Might pursued earlier? All Might almost choked in his own saliva. Shit. All Might? Seriously? Do you think he will come? Shit, I've caught a glimpse of him before. No, you didn't. Well then, why is he taking so long to get here? I'm right here, you know. All Might clenched again his scar, but when he looked again in the direction of the slime, he saw a green blur running towards him, shocking him. What the hell is he doing? What the hell am I doing? Thought Izuku, running toward the slime that had captured his classmate. Ketsuki Bakugo, he is not my friend. He bullied me whenever he could and insults me every time he opens his mouth. So why am I trying to save him? Izuku dodged a tentacle made of slime, throwing his school bag so as to hinder the sight of the villain before jumping on him, grabbing a wrist of Bakugo. Deku, what are you doing here? Shouted the blonde boy, looking at the older boy. My legs move by themselves. I really don't understand why, shouted back Izuku, trying to free him. I have no reason to help you. But it will be a cold day in hell when I'll let someone die under my gaze without doing anything. Having removed the school bag from his face, the slime tried to hit Izuku with a huge hand, but the boy saw him and raised his free arm to counterattack. Flames began to wrap his arm as Izuku glared at the slime. I do not care if I get in trouble, but I will not let you kill an innocent. But just when he was about to hit the slime, a hand grabbed the wrists of both boys. Well spoken. I could not have said it better, shouted All Might with smoke rising from his body. Right now, I was scared. I feared for my life. How pathetic, thought All Might, raising his right fist. Heroes put their lives all the time in the game. With all his strength, All Might hit the ground, screaming, Detroit smash, and thus destroying the slime again, which ended up on the neighboring walls and on the asphalt. As All Might was immediately surrounded by the crowd, The other heroes began to retrieve the pieces of the slime. After almost 20 minutes of work, Izuku found himself faced with an old acquaintance intent on screaming at him. "What went through your head? You almost died. I cannot save you every time you get close to danger," shouted Death Arms while Izuku tried to ignore him. Yes, I know. Can you stop screaming, please?" asked Izuku, making him even more angry. "Why you?" Meanwhile, Bakugo was being praised for the strength of his quirk, but seemed to ignore the words of the heroes, just as Izuku was ignoring a second outburst by Death Arms. Fortunately for him, after that outburst, he had the go-ahead to go home. Finally, what a day! I just hope I was not seen by the cameras. All we need is for Johnny to reproach me, thought Izuku with a grim look before hearing a loud "Hey, good for nothing" behind him, and upon tuning, he was surprised to see Bakugo standing a few meters from him. "Don't tell me he really wants to thank me. I never asked for you to come help me," hissed Bakugo, clenching his teeth. "I didn't need to be saved. I could take care of myself. Okay. I do not need to apologize or thank a quirkless person like you." And with that, he walked away, shouting a last "fucking bike nerd." Izuku couldn't help but sweat drop at him. He definitely has a problem controlling his emotions. Before shaking his head, "Better go home before something else hapdash." "I'm here, All Might," shouted Izuku with wide eyes. "What are you doing here? You were surrounded by a horde of reporters. I can avoid them if I wanted," said All Might, pointing at the sky. "After all, I'm all blurred might. Cannot you do something for the blood?" shouted Izuku, looking at the slim form of his idol. "Kid, I came to thank you and make some corrections. And I also have a proposal for you," said All Might, looking at him with serious eyes. "If you hadn't been there, and if I didn't hear your personal story, I would have risked doing nothing, letting that poor boy die. For all that, I must thank you. Don't. I did something stupid, putting Bakugo's life at risk when the other heroes were deciding what to do," said Izuku, shaking his head. "About that," shouted the blonde skinny man, catching his attention. "At that time, no one could act. You're the only one who did something, you. A simple boy without quirk. And that really touched me. Does he still think that I do not have a quirk?" thought Izuku, wanting to interrupt All Might to tell him that in reality, he was not quirkless. But out of respect, he let him talk. "Do you know how some heroes were born when they were just students?" All Might took a deep breath. "They were born with the phrase, 'My body moved by itself.'" Izuku looked at him carefully, feeling the energy in those words as well as something moving inside him. "This is what happened to you too, right?" "Yes," Izuku answered, thinking back to some words he thought he had buried in his mind. "Mom, I can be a hero too. I can get a quirk. I'm sure you will succeed, honey." "Kid," said All Might with the most serious look he could master, "you can be a real hero." Izuku felt like he was struck by lightning when he heard those words. Memories of when he was a child began to crowd his mind uncontrollably. Wanting to get a powerful quirk, wanting to become a hero, wanting to become like All Might. Those had been his dreams. However, a more recent memory became vivid like no other, reminding him of the sad reality. "All Might, Izuku clenched his fists, searching for the courage to answer him. He could have told him many things. He wanted to tell him many things, but a few simple words came out of his mouth. "I don't want to be a hero." Warning: Izuku will be a year older than the Izuku of the manga/anime. An unreal silence reigned in the street as the sunlight was fading more and more. All Might stood still with the sun behind him, his eyes wide open as his mind tried to process the words just heard. In front of him, Izuku did not look away, having already said what he wanted to say. Looking away would have seemed an action worthy of someone who only knows how to speak and not act. "You do not want to become a hero?" repeated All Might, thinking he hadn't heard correctly, but seeing Izuku nod, he knew he had heard all too well. "Is it because you are quirkless?" "Actually, I'm not quirkless," said Izuku, confusing him. "True. When I was 4 years old, I went to a doctor to see if I could know what my quirk was, but he told me that I belonged to that slice of people born without a quirk. On the same day, I also learned about my mother's cancer." Seeing the confusion still present on All Might's face, he added, "You have revealed to me your secret, albeit not voluntarily, so I'd like to return the favor somehow. It's a complicated story. Would you like to hear it?" Seeing the seriousness of his gaze, All Might nodded. "If, despite your desire to help, you have decided not to want to become a hero, it must be one hell of a story. More than you think," thought Izuku before calling Johnny with his cell phone, warning him that he would be late and that he could have dinner without him. After the call was over, Izuku led All Might for a few minutes in the residential area until they arrived at an old abandoned building site where there were still several scaffolding and machinery. Izuku went to lean against an iron beam while All Might sat down on a pile of cement bags, nodding his head. "I'm all ears, kid. I would say it would be right to start from the beginning when my mother miraculously managed to defeat the cancer," said Izuku, folding his arms over the chest. "I do not know what data you were able to recover from the medical device that my mom used, but I do not think that, even if you were able to recover her body, someone would be able to create a cure." "Why?" "Yes, many doctors and scientists are still working on the cure using all that they can, but my mom did not defeat the cancer, not alone at least. Someone healed her within a night," said Izuku, shocking the pro hero. "How can you be so sure about that?" Asked All Might. "No quirk used to cure has ever managed to cancel the effects of cancer. When that doctor told me that I was quirkless, my mother asked me to wait outside the room because she had to speak privately with him. It was at that moment that I met a man dressed elegantly," explained Izuku, looking at the sky. "I do not know why, but I told him my problem and that I would never be able to become a hero. Imagine my surprise when he told me that not all quirks were inherited through the genetic code, but that there were several quirks that could be passed from person to person, or that some quirks could even create new quirks and transmit them." Again, All Might was shocked. Of course, he knew of the existence of the quirks that might have passed from one person to another. He himself owned one, but what shocked him was that people outside a restricted circle knew about this information. "Who was this man? Do you know his name?" "As it may seem absurd, no, I do not know his name. I met him only 3 times in my life, and I never managed to ask him his name," said Izuku with a shrug. "The first time was in that waiting room. I met him for the second time on the following day, and I explained to him about my mother, so he asked me something that even today I struggle to believe. He looked at All Might with eyes full of seriousness. He offered me a contract, a cure for my mother and a quirk for me, in exchange for my soul, even if not literally. He told me that in due course, he would come to me to collect the favor and that I would have to help him with something, but I do not know what." All Might seemed to guess something and said, "You accepted the offer. That man had offered you what you most wanted, isn't it?" "As a matter of fact, yes, I signed that contract, although not in a normal way or voluntary for that matter," nodded Izuku, looking down with sad eyes. "The next day, my mother was healed. I do not know how it was possible, but she was healed and she decided to go to the city center for some shopping. You know what happened then? The terrorist attack. Yes, as I told you, at the hospital I met Johnny, an old friend of my mother and my new guardian," said Izuku. "From that day on, I lived with him, slowly discovering some aspects of the quirk I had received, although I still do not know when I received it exactly. It all started when I melted something unintentionally, and from then on the situation has improved, so to speak. But then, 2 years ago, I met that man for the 3rd time, and that's when everything went to hell." "What do you mean?" All Might asked, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Izuku remained silent for several seconds, his head bent with the eyes shadowed by his hair. When All Might was about to speak again, he slowly raised his head, which began to burn like the rest of his body. The blonde hero jumped on his feet, alarmed by what was happening, but when he was about to run toward the boy to help him extinguish the flames, he realized how Izuku was calm while his clothes were not affected by the flames. In a few moments, he saw the body of Izuku being consumed by the flames except for the bones. But all the questions that were forming in his mind had only one obscure answer when, in front of him, nothing remained but a flaming skeleton. Slowly, Izuku raised a hand and placed 2 fingers between his teeth. Despite the complete absence of a throat, he managed to emit a short but strong whistle, confusing All Might. However, his confusion was short-lived when, in the distance, he heard the roar of an engine and, to his astonishment, saw a motorbike wrapped in flames jumping over the building site wall without difficulty, landing near Izuku. At that moment, the mind of All Might, with years of experience, put all the pieces together, and the pro hero looked at Izuku with narrowed eyes. "Flaming Centaur." Izuku nodded slowly. "Before you ask, no. It was not my intention to make myself known for those things I've done. Forgive me, kid, but it's hard to believe. It's been 2 years since your first appearance, and your list of victims is not exactly short," said All Might in a serious tone of voice. "Understandable, but my story is not over yet. If you can, listen to me until the end, and then you can judge me, said Izuku with a calm voice, although not exactly normal. All Might looked at him for a few seconds, but then sighed heavily. Sitting down again, it may not seem like it, but I often let myself be controlled by emotions. This should be one of those situations, but if you have had the courage to show me your true identity, then it is only right that I listen to the end. Go ahead, my thanks, nodded Izuku before resuming. When I met that man for the third time, he somehow managed to unlock part of my power, saying that in a few years he would come to collect the favor. At that moment, I felt like I was on fire. I had never felt such a strong pain, and my body started to move on its own. Without realizing it, I took a bike that started on its own and drove to an old warehouse where I slowly began to transform into what you see now. That was the night when Flaming Centaur killed for the first time, and yet I feel like throwing up at the thought of that night. He looked up at All Might. I had no control over my quirk. My quirk was in control, and I could not stop it. I could only remember every morning what had happened during the night. The faces of those people whom I had killed without mercy. With the passing of the months, I began to control it, but only after a year I managed to reach an acceptable level, going so far as to be able to transform at will. However, even today my quirk acts alone. When the evil at night reaches certain levels, I cannot control it. I can only hope that it will not harm innocent people, but as far as I can tell, the targets of my quirk are villains and those with souls stained with blood. All Might looked at him with sympathetic eyes. Why not ask for help after the first night? There are specialized centers for the control of one's quirk. It would not work. My quirk is too powerful, and I was scared, admitted Izuku looking down. I was only 14 and had just killed a dozen people. I couldn't just go to some hero and explain what happened. I wanted to become a hero too, after all. Instead, I decided to learn how to control my quirk so I could help people, but a year ago, I realized that I could never be a hero, and I gave up my dream. Why? What happened a year ago? Asked All Might with curiosity and anxiety present in the voice. Perhaps it was the voice of experience, but something told him that it was not something pleasant. A year ago, Izuku looked back at him, and All Might felt uncomfortable upon seeing the look of that inflamed skull. A year ago, I almost killed a hero. Flashback, Tokyo's port / a year ago. Izuku silently drove his bike through the streets of the port area of Tokyo, blowing up the light of the different street lamps in its passage and setting fire to the few trees present. Apparently, it was a side effect of his transformation, but he did not care. Not when he was transformed, at least. That was one of the nights where his quirk had taken control. Its thirst for vengeance had been piqued by the presence of several villains in the area, many of whom had a soul completely black. A call too strong to resist, and Izuku could not do anything to stop his own power. Suddenly, he stopped in the middle of a road near a large warehouse, then looking at the structure in silence. Hearing some laughter inside the building, Izuku got off his bike and approached the wall, placing a hand on it. In a few moments, the entire wall was crossed by red cracks and then collapsed to the ground. Ignoring the destruction caused, he advanced into the structure until he came to a large gate, behind which he could hear the laughter of a group of people. With a gesture similar to the previous one, he touched the metal surface, but this time he melted it instantly, scaring the people inside who, at the sight of Izuku and his flaming skull, jumped away in fear, looking for something to use as a weapon. "Who the hell are you?" shouted a man with yellow skin and the eyebrows similar to lightnings. Izuku didn't answer, merely looking at the group in front of him. 7 people, all armed with quirks and weapons of different types, including an assault rifle, probably obtained from the black market. But what most attracted his attention were the crimes reflected in their souls. Theft, fraud, murder, betrayal, rape. "Hey, I'm talking to you, freak!" The same man shouted with sparks around his feet. Looking at him, Izuku took off the chain he wore around his chest, holding it with his right hand. "Well, I don't know who the hell you think you are, but you just made a big mistake." After charging both feet with electricity, the man darted forward to hit Izuku with a kick to the skull, but the power of the shot simply tilted Izuku's head to the right, leaving the others open-mouthed. "Funny," said Izuku looking back at the man who was now walking backwards. "I was going to say the same thing." Before the man could react, Izuku threw his chain around his chest like a snake, and after a violent jerk from Izuku, the yellow-skinned man was reduced to a pile of ashes. "He killed Simpson," screamed a tall man with bull horns and a golden ring hanging on the nose. "You're a dead freak," shouted a third man with hair similar to iron wires before stabbing him in the back with a knife. Feeling the sound of bones breaking, the man grinned triumphantly, but when he pulled out the knife, he saw the blade gleam red before it melted instantly, missing the side glare that Izuku had sent to him. What the dash? He didn't see the fist of Izuku wrapped in the chain that hit him in the face, throwing him against a wall, but his companion saw his face, or what remained of it, all too well while the man was writhing on the ground in pain for having most of his face burned and destroyed at the same time. "You bastard!" shouted two of the remaining opponents, both perfectly identical, but while the first had some iron blades on his right arm, the other had them on his left arm, and both of them tried to behead Izuku, but having heard them coming, he turned to them and grabbed the blades closer to him with his bare hands, blocking their attack. Just when he was about to melt their blades, the bullman charged him from the side, managing to hit Izuku with his head and throw him against a pile of crates, destroying them all. "That was really close," breathed one of the twins, looking at the blade that had been grasped, noticing how it had been deformed by the heat. His brother was about to answer him when a violent explosion made the whole structure tremble and slammed the remaining 5 villains to the ground. One of them, who seemed to be made entirely of mud and rocks, was the first to recover, and when he saw the origin of the explosion, he could not hold back a cry of fear when he saw Izuku walking towards them without even a scratch on him. "Damn monster!" he shouted before jumping on him, spreading his entire body up to block the entire body of Izuku into a ball of mud. "Good job, Rocky!" exulted the bullman. "Now kill him and dash!" His words died in his throat when he saw the whole ball of mud turn black as if it were made of burnt wood. A moment later, what was once his comrade was shattered, showing Izuku with his flames still alive. "Jay, just die already!" shouted the twins, trying again to attack him, but this time he did not try to grab their blades, but slightly puffed his chest as if he had just breathed in the air. When they were both close enough, he blew a large amount of fire out of his mouth. Neither of them had time to scream before being reduced to ashes. Looking up from the remains of the twins, Izuku noticed that the last 2 villains were no longer in sight, but feeling a slight but audible click to his right, he turned his head in that direction, finding himself face to face with the barrel of an AK-47 held by the bullman. The weapon was visibly small for him, but it did not stop him from pulling the trigger while screaming "die." Before the first bullet could reach him, Izuku opened his mouth and stood in that position until the last bullet had left the magazine. In the silence that followed, the bullman could only press the trigger of the now empty rifle with fear vivid in his eyes as Izuku slowly closed his mouth. A second later, he tilted his head back slightly before throwing up all the bullets swallowed together with flames in the villain's face. The bullman could only scream for a moment before the bullets and flames tore his head to pieces, killing him in a few seconds. Ignoring the lifeless body of the villain, Izuku looked away and then pointed to a spot on the other side of the warehouse U. At that moment, the last villain became visible, showing his naked body since he had freed himself of his clothes guilty. "And no, stay away from me. Stay away," shouted the man trying to run away from Izuku, but the young boy had other plans in mind, and with a quick movement of his arm, lashed his chain like a whip, managing to hit the man behind his right knee, causing him to fall ruinously to the ground. Seeing him on the ground screaming in pain, Izuku walked towards him, preparing his chain, but a powerful male voice shouted behind him, catching his attention. "Stop where you are, crazy torch!" Turning on himself, Izuku barely had time to see an iron brass knuckles before being hit in the face. The force behind the fist was such that he took a step backwards while turning his head. After a second necessary to keep the balance, Izuku returned to look at his assailant, ignoring his own jaw that had remained attached only on the right, hanging freely. In a few seconds, he had a good view of the 3 newcomers, 2 of whom were looking at him with disbelief visible on their faces, while the third, the one who had punched him, was staring at him with narrowed eyes. The latter was a man with a muscular body, half his face covered with a black wraparound mask and a pair of brass knuckles clearly visible on his fists. The other 2, much less threatening, were a girl with pink hair wearing what could be called a succubus uniform, and a young boy wearing a black mask to cover his lower face. And even in his current state of mind, Izuku could hardly believe it, an all-might-haired hooded jacket. Ignoring those three for a moment, Izuku put a hand on his dangling jaw and, with a loud crack, put it back in place in a second. This surprised even more the two younger newcomers, while the one who had punched him seemed vaguely impressed. Raising one hand, he showed him his index finger and moved it to the right and to the left, slowly shaking his head and making a disapproving sound with his throat at each movement of his finger. After that, he turned to follow the wounded villain who was still trying to escape, but the man behind him put a hand on his shoulder. "It looks like you haven't yet grasped the concept, Pretty Torch," said the masked man, strengthening the grip. "I cannot let you kill that man." "H.A. Knuckle Duster, is it wise?" asked the younger boy, looking at Izuku carefully. "He is." "I know who he is, Crawler," hissed the man with a low growl. "Precisely for this reason, I cannot let him kill that man. Thanks to him, in the last year, more and more people have begun to hate and repudiate the vigilantes like us, as if we did not have enough problems before." He then looked at the pink-haired girl. "Pop Step, go and help that guy. Even if he deserves to be beaten up properly, this time only we will take him to the police. So you can also think with your mind and not just with your fists," said the girl with a little grin, missing the side glare of Izuku, before bending her legs slightly. Without putting too much strength, she jumped forward, almost touching the ceiling of the warehouse, but suddenly felt something wrap around her left ankle. In that brief instant of stalemate, she managed to look down, seeing Knuckle Duster and Crawler's shocked eyes, and the chain that had blocked her in Izuku's hand. Sensing his intentions, Crawler tried to stop Izuku, but he acted at that moment, and with a strong jerk of his arm, he crashed Pop Step into the ground, cracking the concrete floor with her body. While Crawler was paralyzed by the shock, Knuckle Duster seemed to be enraged, and with one hand, he turned Izuku and then tried to hit him again in the face, but this time Izuku dodged at the last second to avoid his fist and attempted an attack on the belly of the man. The masked vigilante sidestepped, avoiding the flaming fist, and he managed to hit Izuku with a left hook, this time sending him several yards away. "Crawler, I know." Without hesitating for a moment, Crawler put both hands on the ground and then activated his quirk, shooting forward with incredible speed, aiming to hit Izuku, who was already getting up, albeit slowly. His high-speed front kick was however blocked by the hand of Izuku, shocking Crawler with his strength and accuracy in predicting his attack. Looking at the young vigilante, Izuku growled and then lifted him, still holding Crawler by the foot, before slamming him against the ground, knocking the air out of his lungs. Feeling heavy steps, Izuku looked at Knuckle Duster, who was running toward him, and tried to hit him with a lash of his chain. The older vigilante seemed to anticipate his attack and took a step back, but the length of the chain was still sufficient to reach him, opening a deep cut from the left jaw to between the eyebrows. Cursing out loud because of the pain, the man did not miss the chance to grab the chain with both hands. "I won't let you get away with this." Growling again, Izuku jerked the chain, managing to drag the man towards him. Surprised by his physical strength, Knuckle Duster couldn't block Izuku's left hand, which grabbed his face before slamming him against the ground. Seeing all three vigilantes on the ground, wounded and in pain but alive, Izuku looked around for the last villain. Then, noticing a trail of blood leading to the secondary exit of the warehouse. Leaving the three vigilantes behind, Izuku followed the trail. "I cannot feel my back," groaned Crawler in a low tone. "I'll try to feel it again." "We have to stop that walking torch," said Knuckle Duster, trying to stop the bleeding from his wound with a hand. Near them, Pop Step managed to get on her knees, though with difficulty. "We have to hurry up, or that man is as good as dead." Outside the warehouse, Izuku had found the wounded man again. The villain was still crawling in search of safety and had arrived in a huge open space with warehouses on the right and the sea on the left, with several fishing boats docked. Without wasting any further time, Izuku advanced toward him, but suddenly, something jumped out of the sea, creating a large column of water before landing not far from him. If Izuku had had his eyes, he would have narrowed them at the sight of someone far more dangerous than the vigilantes or the already dead villains, because a few meters away from him, there was a tall man dressed in a plain white suit with armor on his chest and forearms, as well as an orca mask that also served as a cape. Gang Orca, current number 10 in the Pro Hero ranking, looked at him with his large eyes surrounded by many red rings. "So you are that Flaming Centaur that everyone talks about." He took a step forward, assuming a fighting pose, You have been unlucky to find yourself in this area with me on patrol. Your trail of victims ends here and now. Without any warning, Gang Orca rushed forward with a speed unthinkable for a man of his size and hit Izuku in the chest with a fist, knocking him against the wall of a warehouse, creating a crater in the metal surface. Completely unharmed by the attack, Izuku jumped on the ground, roaring to his new opponent, and hurled his chain against Gang Orca, but the hero grabbed it without problems and proceeded to pull Izuku to him with a strong tug. When he was close enough, Gang Orca made a very loud noise, similar to an orca sound, that crackled the surrounding ground, knocking Izuku to the ground. Believing he knocked him out with that last attack, Gang Orca approached Izuku, but at the last moment he saw him rise with the flames around his skull more violent and strong than before. With a roar, Izuku ran to him and tried to hit his opponent with a fist that was intercepted by a fist of Gang Orca. The impact generated a strong shock wave and further cracks formed in the ground, but neither gave way. On the contrary, both tried to hit each other again and achieved the same result. After the second shot, Izuku tried again to attack him with the chain, but Gang Orca avoided it and grabbed Izuku by the collar of his jacket, and then projected him back first to the ground with all his strength, creating a deformation in the ground. The hero then raised a fist to hit him, but Izuku spat a large amount of flames from his mouth, striking point-blank Gang Orca, who was forced to let him go to extinguish the flames. With a growl, the hero grabbed a bottle of water attached to his waist and spilled its contents on his head, so as to hydrate his body again. In the meantime, Izuku had got up again, and after a short crossing of glares, he blew another cone of flames while Gang Orca attacked again with a sound attack. Flames and sound collided, generating a violent explosion that made the whole area tremble. When his attack ended, Gang Orca could not help but notice how the temperature around him had risen dangerously. TCH, it's like when I spar with Endeavor. Their flames are definitely too hot for me. If this fight goes on much longer, I will lose for sure, thought Gang Orca before looking at the sea behind Izuku. Perhaps this will work. When Izuku took a step forward, Gang Orca ran to meet him as fast as he could and hit him with his shoulder, sending him flying into a fishing boat that swayed dangerously due to the impact. Not at all damaged by the attack, Izuku burned what was left of the cabin, just in time to see Gang Orca crashing into him with both hands closed like a mallet. The power of the blow that followed broke the boat in two, slowly making it sink, and sent Izuku to the bottom of the bay. Gang Orca followed him easily, being able to swim freely like an orca, and when he saw him, he noticed that the flames had dimmed, but not completely. Grasping him again by the lapel of his jacket, the hero hit Izuku with a sound attack, and since the sounds traveled faster in the water, the effect was even more devastating, destroying part of the seabed and shaking the sea above them. Having no problem staying underwater for a few minutes, Gang Orca let the sand raised by his attack settle again, and when it did, he saw that the flames had completely died out, leaving only a skeleton. Now, since there wasn't a heart, there could not be a heartbeat. However, he noticed the fact that the skeleton was not falling apart like a normal skeleton, but for some reason it remained all in one piece. He must have lost consciousness or something like that, thought Gang Orca, preparing to swim to the surface, but two skeletal hands suddenly grabbed his wrists. Caught off guard, he looked back at the skeleton only to be blinded by the flames that flared up again as a voice screamed surprise. After that simple word, Gang Orca felt the temperature of the water rise more and more until it boiled, and his screams were easily overwhelmed by the inhuman roar of Izuku. The three vigilantes managed to arrive in the open space after recovering from the beating just suffered, but looking around they saw no one. "What the hell happened here?" shouted Knuckle Duster, looking at the devastation caused by Izuku and Gang Orca. "Someone must have decided to face Flaming Centaur, and I think they did not hold back," said Pop Step with bandages around her head. Guys, why is the sea boiling?" asked Crawler, and when the other two noticed that detail, a violent explosion threw a number of boats into the air, causing them to crash into the ground or even into the nearby warehouses. But what caught their attention was the person thrown into the sky along with the boats that crashed not far from them. In a few seconds, the smoke cleared and Crawler paled to see Gang Orca on the ground with his chest exposed and covered with burns as well as his arms, the worst around his wrists. "What the dash?" Knuckle Duster was interrupted when someone else jumped out of the water, landing near a destroyed boat. The three vigilantes immediately prepared for a new fight at the sight of Izuku, but he ignored them, intent on observing Gang Orca as he stood up with difficulty. Looking down, Izuku saw a large chain with an anchor sticking to it, and without any difficulty, began to spin the chain over his head, making it spin faster and faster. Popstep looked a bit confused. What is he doing? He wants to throw the anchor on that hero. Gang Orca? Move away, shouted Crawler, preparing to use his quirk, but at that moment, as expected, Izuku threw the anchor with all the chain on Gang Orca. The hero, having heard Crawler's screams, knew what was coming, but his legs did not respond to his commands, so he did the only thing that came to mind and raised his left arm to catch the anchor. When his hand was able to grasp the large iron bullet, his entire body was pushed backwards for several meters, digging 2 furrows in the cement with his feet. However, in the silence of the night, the three vigilantes could distinctly hear the blood-curdling noise of Gang Orca's bones breaking in his arm. Without saying a word, the hero dropped the anchor to the ground as his arm fell helplessly along his body, showing large black bruises where his bones had broken. Izuku looked at him for a few seconds, thinking that the battle was over, but then he saw Gang Orca advancing towards him with blood dripping from his mouth and wounds. "What's the problem, Flaming Centaur?" asked Gang Orca, staring at him without fear. "I'm still here." Izuku snarled at him, but decided nevertheless to put an end to that fight. So he took with one hand the chain, not caring that the anchor was behind Orca Gang. Izuku had something else in mind. When they were within fist's reach, Gang Orca tried to hit him first, but Izuku lowered himself and punched the hero in the stomach, causing him to vomit blood mixed with saliva. However, taking advantage of Izuku's position, Gang Orca hit him using his hand like a blade from above, managing to break his left collarbone, but it seemed not to disturb Izuku, who hit him again in the stomach, making him finally fall to his knees. Now ready to finish the fight, Izuku turned to the right and saw the three vigilantes running towards him, but with a movement of his hand, a wall of flames rose from the ground, blocking their advance. Focusing again on Gang Orca, Izuku was hit by a sound attack, but this was weaker than the others, and Izuku managed to counter it with a roar, creating even more flames around him, before wrapping the chain around Gang Orca's neck. Gang Orca widened his eyes as Izuku began to tighten the grip with the chain, trying to strangle him. The hero grabbed the chain with his only good arm, trying to loosen his grip, but he knew immediately that there was no way to prevail against the strength of Izuku, especially in his conditions. So Gang Orca grabbed his flaming skull, ignoring the flames that burned his skin, and began to tighten more and more, opening some cracks in the bones. Izuku ignored Gang Orca's vain attempt to stop him and put more pressure around his neck. The hero did the same, trying to destroy his skull, but with the passing of the seconds his strength left him, and finally his hand fell helpless along his body while his eyes closed slowly with the image of a flaming skull burned into his mind. It was at that moment that something seemed to snap inside Izuku. The flames around him seemed to fade, and the grip on the chain became weaker, letting Gang Orca fall to the ground. Behind the wall of fire, the three vigilantes saw Izuku raise the hands in front of his face before looking at the downed form of the hero. "What I have done?" Izuku whispered before roaring toward the sky with new flames dancing around him. "Hey, what's going on with him?" asked Popstep, frightened by the sudden roar. "I don't know, but we need to dash," said Knuckle Duster before noticing the wounded villain behind some crates while trying to get away after miraculously succeeding in avoiding the fight. Unfortunately for him, Knuckle Duster was not the only one to notice his retreating form. "You!" Trembling upon hearing that voice, the man turned for a moment and saw Izuku focused exclusively on him. That gave him the energy he needed to limp faster, but Izuku had now reached the limit of his patience. Seeing an underwater rifle among the remains of a wrecked boat, Izuku took it with his right hand and then aimed at the man's back. "What is he doing?" "That rifle has no darts," said Crawler with confused eyes, but then, much to their horror, the underwater rifle was enveloped in flames, changing shape and assuming a more demonic appearance with the end of the barrel that had assumed the shape of a skull. Before they could scream anything, Izuku pulled the trigger and a dart made entirely of flames darted through the air, hitting the wounded man in the middle of his back. He didn't even have the time to scream that his whole body was reduced to ashes. The three vigilantes had no idea what to do now that the villain was dead, but Gang Orca was still on the ground, too close to Izuku for their tastes. But all three of them were forced to jump to the side to avoid being hit by Izuku's motorcycle that passed easily in the middle of the wall of flames, dissipating it. They saw the bike stop near Izuku, who put his new weapon in a holster just created on the side of his flaming vehicle. Knuckle Duster gritted his teeth. "Getting up, what are you?" Seeing that Izuku had ignored him, mounting on his bike, he shouted, "What the hell are you?" After a few seconds of silence, Izuku turned his head towards them, thus showing the cracks in his skull that were already closing up. The last of them went from his left socket down to his jaw, and, closing up, seemed to follow the trace of a tear. "I don't know." Those words seemed to stun the three vigilantes, who could only watch as Izuku drove his bike away from them, fading into the darkness of the night. In flashback, All Might remained silent, carefully watching the young boy sitting on the ground a few yards away from him. During his story, Izuku had transformed into his human form, and as the story progressed, the hero had seen different emotions on his face, mainly shame, anger, and fear. Now I remember, when I was not in town, I received a call from the government. Apparently, Gang Orca had been hospitalized and his condition was critical. Multiple fractures throughout the body, third-degree burns on the chest and arms, head injury, damaged throat, and so on. They told me that maybe his career was over, but he recovered within a few months and continued with his job as a pro hero. But since that day, he has always avoided the port. Said All Might while looking at the sky. "So it was you?" "Yes." "Do you understand now why I cannot be a hero?" "All Might, I have no right to be a hero. For 2 years, I killed villains or sent them into a coma. I almost killed one of the best heroes in Japan, and I also wounded those vigilantes who wanted to stop me from killing," said Izuku, looking down. "How can I even hope to become a hero when my own Quirk seems to have been created to kill? That's why I do not want to be a hero. The heroes rescue people and imprison the villains, while I ignore the innocent and kill the criminals." For a few seconds, the two remained silent. All Might, despite his past experiences, did not know what to say. He knew that Izuku was basically right. After all, he had fought a hero, risking to kill him, but, surprisingly, Gang Orca had not held him responsible, saying that it was he who attacked Izuku first, and the three vigilantes had said the same. So, as regards that particular episode, Izuku had acted in self-defense. However, this could not erase the trail of death he had left behind. "This is troublesome," murmured the blonde hero. "Technically, you are not labeled as a criminal, but as a vigilante." "I know," nodded Izuku without looking at him. "How?" "Certain data are classified and not public." This time, Izuku looked at him with a little smile. "We have a mutual friend, the detective Naomi Sakachi. He is one of the 3 people who knows the whole story. The others are you and my guardian." All Might was genuinely surprised. "He is aware of your Quirk? Then why? When he was still a policeman, he took me to the hospital during the day of the terrorist attack, and from then on he became a family friend. When I told him the whole story, he proposed to take me to the police station to be able to file the case of Flaming Centaur as an isolated case of loss of control. But Johnny opposed him, and in the end they both promised to keep my identity a secret. So I would like to ask you not to get angry with him for not telling you. I know you're both great friends," explained Izuku, earning a loud sigh from All Might. All right, I will not tell him anything," said the hero, returning to the initial topic. "You are not a villain. Not officially, at least, even if I fear that many people call you that. But you know, not by chance, there are unofficial rankings managed by fans." Izuku arched an eyebrow. "You mean like the looks most like a villain ranking?" "Indeed. There are dozens of heroes in the world who are not welcome. But in spite of this, they are heroes who never hurt anyone innocent, more or less. Endeavor is a clear example. Although he's the number 2, he is not well seen by civilians." Explained All Might. "The same could be said of you, in a sense. You're trying to master your Quirk to avoid killing again. That is a behavior that can only be associated to a hero or a vigilante who is extremely loyal to his vocation of doing justice on his own without killing anyone. Today, while the other heroes were undecided on what to do, you acted to save that student. Probably, if I had not intervened, you would have burned that slime with your flames. But the fact remains that you have acted, not them. A person who doesn't want to be a hero wouldn't have moved a finger." Izuku looked at the ground again. Even if it were as you say, my face is well known. Thanks to Neo Mesa, the police never come to investigate in my area, but if I were to become a hero, the situation could get worse, and I do not want Johnny to be affected because of me. All Might couldn't help but show a little grin, see? Even if you do not realize it, you think of others and their safety, but you have a point here. After 2 years of activity, all the heroes are aware of your existence, and practically all the civilians have heard something about you. So a possible career as a hero is definitely full of difficulties. But what would you do if I told you that there is a way around this problem? Seeing the confused look on Izuku's face, All Might added, kid, there is a way for you to become a hero. When I stopped you after the accident with the slime, I wanted to talk to you because I saw something more than a simple hero in you, and now that I know your whole story, I am even more convinced of my choice. You wanted to be a hero, and now you have a huge power inside of you. But just because of that power, you decided to give up your dream, trying to control your quirk, when other people in your place would have used that power to gain fame in a short time, not caring for the victims on their way. Yours is a behavior worthy of a hero. All Might stood up, dusting his pants. Kid, there is something I have to tell you, and it's important, but first I want to see your determination to follow your dreams. There is a famous beach that has become a dump not far from here. In 2 days, at 6 in the morning, get there if you still want to become a hero. I could have a solution for you and your problem. And with that, he left, leaving behind a confused Izuku, who could only watch the sky. The determination to follow my dreams, huh? Not far from the building's site, All Might started a call from his cell phone. After a few seconds, someone answered. Nizu, it's me. I need to ask you a favor. Dump beach / 2 days later. All Might was sitting on a refrigerator, looking absently at his cell phone. 6 o'clock in the morning, and no trace of Izuku. He sighed slightly, maybe that Quirk has really conditioned him not to become a hero such. A shame, he seemed more than suitable to become Dash. He was interrupted by the roar of an engine not far away, and, turning slightly, he smiled as he saw Izuku park his bike before reaching him. Glad to see you here, young Midoriya, said All Might using his family name. You said you could have a solution for my problem. I wanted to know what it was, said Izuku looking at his idol. I do not want to become a hero, All Might. My past would not allow me to enjoy my life if I could succeed in becoming one. This could be true, but it happens that I can give you a second chance, said All Might, confusing Izuku. You've probably already heard of the UA High School, the prestigious academy for heroes? Difficult not to know it when it is not far from my house, said Izuku with a nod. Good. You must know that its principal is a dear friend of mine. I explained some things to him the other day, and before you get agitated, I just told him I know Flaming Centaur. He does not know anything about Izuku Midoriya, your guardian or your contract, explained All Might. I asked him for a favor, that is, that you could enroll in his academy, so as to become a hero. Izuku widened his eyes in surprise. What? But I do not want to become a hero. And how can I go to Japan's most prestigious academy when I'm labeled as a vigilante? Before exposing my idea, I have to explain something about me. Young Midoriya, what do you think my quirk is? Asked All Might with a serious look. Izuku raised an eyebrow while holding his chin with a hand. Well, I have followed your main website for many years, and among all the ideas that the fans have exposed, something like enhanced body or super strength remain the most likely solutions. They are both wrong, said All Might with a calm voice. My quirk is not something so simple. It is the quirk to transfer your own power to another person, and it's known as One for All. One for All? Repeated Izuku, looking at his idol with a mix of awe and confusion. Yes. You see, the man who gave you your quirk was right. There are different ways to get a quirk. I, just like you, was quirkless, but then the one who became my teacher decided to transfer into me One for All, a quirk that allows the owner to use a stockpiled power in his or her body and to transfer this quirk to someone else. Explained All Might. Right now, I am the 8th owner of One for All, and for years I have sought a worthy successor who could inherit this quirk from me. And here is where you come into play, young Midoriya. And me, shouted Izuku with wide eyes, not expecting something like that. Yes, as I said, you have shown to me that you have the heart of a true hero. I have seen many talents during my hero career, but few have lived up to my expectations, and none of them has ever shown that spark needed to convince me. Until I met you, a young boy with an enormous power, but willing to give up his dream in order not to harm someone who is innocent, said All Might, opening his arms. Young Midoriya, Despite your past, the horrors you saw, the pain you suffered, the sacrifices you made, your heart never stopped beating for justice. I know hundreds of people who would have fallen into the darkness if they got a power like yours, but you did not. You resisted the darkness within you and tried to control it. For what? To help people in need. And that, young Midoriya, All Might jumped down, changing into his hero form, before crushing the fridge with one hand, showing the rising sun. That's what a hero would do. A real hero, not driven by success, by money, by fame, but by the need to help. All Might shouted at Izuku now. As I have already told you, you have shown that you have the heart of a hero, but your mind does not allow you to accept it because of your quirk. In you I see the perfect successor for One for All, but I'm sure that, right now, you would never accept such power, and that's why I want to help you with your current quirk. You want to help me? Asked Izuku with surprised eyes. Of course. You are not in danger, but you still need help to master your power. And helping a person in need is what the heroes do. Shouted All Might before returning to his skinny form. Young Midoriya, I cannot force you to do anything. I could never do something like that, but I still want to help you. And if I'm not enough, UA. High school is the best academy for a reason, and there are teachers on purpose to teach you how to master your quirk. Izuku looked at him for a couple of seconds. Several emotions passed through his face. But in the end, he asked a simple question, why? All Might seem surprised by the question, why what? Why are you doing all this for me? I know heroes always help people in need, but I'm just an ordinary boy. There are God only knows how many people out there that the other day would have acted just like me, probably all worthy of your power, said Izuku with confusion in his eyes. As far as my power is extremely dangerous, there are other people out there who may need your help. So why me? After a moment of silence, All Might sighed. I will not lie to you, but the reason why I feel compelled to help you, besides seeing a successor for One for All, is that you remind me of myself when I was your age. As I said, I was quirkless, but the woman who became my teacher saw something in me and helped me get stronger so that I became what I wanted, the symbol of peace. Izuku looked into his eyes, noting the seriousness behind every single word All Might had just spoken. Sighing, he shook his head. All Might, I cannot inherit that power. You could say the opposite, but I'm not worthy. I cannot become the new symbol of peace or something like that. Not after what happened. I am sorry. I see, murmured All Might with a sigh. Well, I won't force you to change your mind, but my proposal to help you remains valid. The entrance exam will be held in 10 months, and by then I am sure we will have made some progress. You talk about it as if I wanted to take part in that exam, noted Izuku with a raised eyebrow. I know what you think about it, but you have to know that every year the judges of that exam are all heroes, many of whom work at UA as teachers. The principal will put a good word to let you in, and you can show them, as well as to the other examinees, that you are not a monster like they believe. Explained All Might, raising a finger at every point. The judges look at everything during the exam, and whether you pass it or not, they will report what they have seen to the other heroes, and if you make a good impression, I am sure that the public opinion about you will change. At least you will show them that you are willing to help by trying to become a hero. It's a win-win situation for you. Izuku seemed to think about it. Indeed, the situation was very advantageous for him. All Might would help him master his quirk. He still could not believe it, and during the exam, he could show that he was not just a killer, even if he failed the exam. No, I will fail the exam. Despite All Might's words, I cannot ignore what I did. I will treasure his teachings, but I will deliberately fail the exam. After all, it is just about destroying robots from what I have heard. I'll just destroy a few of them, so that I will not be admitted with my score. Thought Izuku with a nod before looking at his idol. I accept. All Might grinned at him. Very well. In this case, it will be better to roll up your sleeves. We have 10 long months ahead of us. Johnny's house / 10 months later, day of the entrance exam. You could always become a model for some stylist or painter, said Johnny, looking at Izuku, who interrupted his breakfast to glare at him. Hey, you always need to have a plan B, no? And your body would be perfect for that role. I already imagine the hosts of girls ready to jump at you as soon as you leave home. Izuku shook his head with a sigh. Unfortunately, Johnny was right. During the last few months, Izuku had trained day after day with all might to improve his body and the control over his quirk. Both had given excellent results, perhaps a little too much, seeing that now Izuku had a physique worthy of a professional swimmer, if not even better, while the control over his quirk was almost perfect. Unfortunately, he was not yet able to block it at night when the evil reached certain levels, but in the last 10 months he had killed only a dozen people. Excellent results, without any doubt. Sighing again, he put the dirty dishes in the sink and went to prepare his uniform for the exam. A simple combination of black leather jacket and trousers with an inverted U on the chest, and the addition of his favorite red shoes and a pair of black fingerless gloves. Placing the uniform in the backpack, Izuku could not help but feel nervous. Since that night when he had transformed for the first time, he had always tried to keep his identity secret. He did not know how people would react to his flaming appearance, so it was better to have an emergency plan. Therefore, on the spot, he placed a black mask over his face that covered from the nose down and a sleeveless hoodie to put under his jacket, with the hood lowered on the face. After a brief inventory, Izuku closed his backpack and left the house, saying goodbye to Johnny and his mother's photo before mounting on his bike. With a violent roar, the engine started and Izuku led the bike toward the UA High School. Parking the motorbike near the entrance, he seemed to attract many incredulous looks, probably due to his means of transport. Right, practically all of them are younger than me, so they do not have a driver's license yet, thought Izuku looking around. "Hey, out of the way!" shouted an all too familiar voice behind him. "Move away? Or do you want to die?" "Bakugo," murmured Izuku, seeing the blonde walk towards the entrance, forcing other people to move, even though many of those present recognized Bakugo because of the incident with the slime. Fortunately, that day Izuku had not been seen by the cameras. Shaking his head, he took a step forward when someone slammed against him from behind, surprising him. "Ow! I'm sorry," said a female voice. "I wasn't looking." Looking back, he saw a brown-haired girl with eyes of the same color as she rubbed her nose, apologizing at the same time. "No need to apologize, nothing happened," said Izuku with a little smile hidden by his mask. "Are you here for the entrance exam too?" Oh, yeah," said the girl with a nod. "Sorry again for the trouble, but I was definitely nervous and I did not see you." Before thinking, and this speaks volumes of how much I am nervous. He is quite tall. "I see. Well, the opening ceremony is about to start, so it will be better to enter. Good luck for the exam," said Izuku with a nod before walking inside the building. Following the crowd, he reached a huge hall with hundreds of seats. Sitting in one of the central rows, Izuku half closed his eyes, waiting for the beginning, which arrived too soon and far too loudly. "Welcome everyone to my live show," shouted a man with sunglasses and blonde hair. "Now I will give you a quick explanation of how this exam will take place. Are you ready?" "So Present Mike works here too? I guess all the teachers in this school are pro-heroes," thought Izuku listening to the rules, but then a guy with glasses stood up saying that on a handout, 4 types of villains were indicated and not 3 as Present Mike had just said. Then he turned to Izuku. "Moreover, what's with you?" "Yeah, you curly-haired boy," said the black-haired boy pointing at him. "I saw you coming with a bike before, and that means you're older than us, but you're taking part in the exam. Does it mean that you have been rejected once and you still want to take part in the exam? If you think this school is a way to pass the time, then you should withdraw immediately." Izuku glared at him without speaking. "You're lucky I'm not here to cause problems, or you'd be already on the ground with your hair completely burned." After that little incident, Present Mike explained the last rules of the test, including the enemies that were worth 0 points. After which all the examinees were accompanied inside of the changing rooms where they could wear their uniforms and equipment before being divided on several buses that brought them near their assigned site, which looked like a small town. "Looks like everyone is quite calm," thought Izuku, making sure the mask and the hood were covering his face well. Looking around, he saw the girl who had bumped into him shortly before, intent on taking deep breaths. "Well, maybe not everyone. I see what your intentions are. You're trying to figure out who has the worst concentration among us, is not it? I'd like to know who you are. You're not here to obstruct our exam, are you? I already told you. Just because you lost a year, you do not have to think about being advantaged or favored in this exam," said the bespectacled boy from before with a glare, while the people close to them began to murmur, saying that Izuku, being someone who had lost a year, did not have to be very strong. Therefore, one less rival in the exam. "So they think they are lucky to have me as an opponent, huh?" thought Izuku with a sigh. "Well, time to show them why they're wrong." And in a matter of seconds, he was engulfed in flames which burned his flesh and skin, leaving only a flaming skeleton who, after lowering his mask and hood, looked at the now pale boy in front of him. Without thinking, he whistled with 2 fingers between his teeth, and, in a few seconds, all the examinees could hear the roar of an engine approaching the gate from which they had just arrived. Much to their horror and fear, they saw a flaming bike approaching their group, forcing them to move, before stopping next to Izuku, who mounted on his bike with surgical calm before looking back at his opponents. "Do you still think you are lucky to have me as an opponent?" asked Izuku, and no one had the courage to answer him until the bespectacled boy could stutter. Flaming Centaur, in the bones, nodded Izuku, before hearing the voice of present Mike shouting, "Aoe and start," while everyone else stood back to look at the tower from which present Mike had screamed. Izuku accelerated toward the center of the city, grabbing his underwater rifle he had acquired during his fight with Gang Orca. Firing 3 darts of fire, he destroyed 3 robots worth a point, and then moved on to the robots that were worth more, but in a few moments he was reached by the other examinees, forcing him to stop for a moment at 22 points. "I'd say that this is enough. Now I just have to look for a place to wait. It would be better to go to less crowded areas," thought Izuku, looking around, but then he spotted a robot destroyed, but not irreparably. Not having anything better to do, he approached the robot, starting to study its engine, chamber of judges / at the same time. "So, that's the infamous Flaming Centaur?" asked a voice looking at a screen. "He does not seem so dangerous." To his right, another hero snorted, "Go read what he did to Gang Orca, and then we'll talk about it." "Wait, is he studying that robot's engine? Does he know he's only 4 minutes left?" asked an amused female voice, while, sitting on the left, a strange white animal looked at all might in his skinny form. "Are you sure about this, Tashinori?" "Yes," nodded the blonde hero, looking at the screen showing Izuku. "I'm sure his hero spirit will surface during this exam." "Well, the time is almost up, so it's time to start the real test," said another hero before pressing a red button, triggering a small series of explosions in the center of the fake city. Fake City, Izuku's exam site. Shortly before, a powerful sneeze sounded in the air, and Izuku inadvertently spat a fireball that melted the robot he was studying. "Damn it, someone is talking about me somewhere." Though Izuku, with a low growl, "I bet it's Johnny." His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a series of explosions not far away, and before he could understand what was happening, he found himself in the shadow of something very big. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a huge robot intent on destroying a building with one hand, and present mixed words came back to him. "That thing is the 0-point villain?" thought Izuku, looking at the devastation caused by the robot when dozens of examiners ran past him, trying to get as far away as possible from the giant gimmick. They certainly know how to scare people. Better to follow the crowd, since destroying that robot does not make any sense, as it is worth 0 points. But after mounting on his motorcycle, he heard a faint moan of pain behind him. Looking back, he saw the brown-haired girl from before on the ground with one foot blocked by some rubble. Why is she not using her quirk? From what I've seen, she can undo the gravity of the object she touches, thought Izuku. Then, noticing the sick color of her face, is she sick? No. Before the exam, she was fine. It must be a side effect of her quirk. Looking absently at the other examinees, Izuku saw that none of them had noticed the girl in trouble, and that they were all running away, including that odious, bespectacled boy. His hands tightened slowly on the handlebars of his motorcycle, which seemed to react to his emotions, emitting a noise like a demonic snarl from the engine. They want to become heroes, but at the sight of a villain stronger than others, they run away like cowards, and nobody tries to help that girl. Izuku thought, with his flames slowly melting the asphalt around him. Pathetic. Feeling the ground shake, Izuku returned his attention to the robot that was advancing towards him, probably to chase the fugitives. But on its way, there was the girl still stuck. With a loud snort, he turned the bike and headed for the girl, grabbing the chain he held around his chest. When he was close enough, Izuku whipped his chain and hit the debris that were blocking the girl, freeing her instantly. Before she could figure out what had happened, he let go of his chain, which wrapped around his chest again, and grabbed her by the collar of her sweatshirt with his free hand. "Whatever happens, do not use your quirk," he shouted before placing the girl on the saddle of his bike, which accelerated by itself, moving away from the robot that had already raised a hand to crush them. "Well, time to get to work," Izuku said to himself before being crushed by the enormous hand of the robot. The impact made the ground tremble, raising a huge cloud of smoke, but that did not deceive the robot. To be precise, it didn't deceive the different sensors placed in its body, as well as the thermal vision implemented in its eyes, and the data it was receiving were, in human terms, definitely alarming. Before the robot could react, its right hand exploded in a ball of fire that consumed its arm up to the middle of the forearm, quickly lifting what was left of its limb to contain the damage. The robot did not notice a chain stuck in the circuits of the arm, and when it had completely raised the arm, Izuku was practically thrown into the air above the robot. Letting go of the chain so as not to break it, Izuku adjusted his position in midair and looked down, precisely at the robot's head. When his ascending motion ended, Izuku began to fall toward the robot, creating a large amount of flames that formed a spiral around his right arm. If he still had lips, Izuku probably would have grinned at the idea he had in mind. During the 10 months of training with All Might, the hero had explained some things about One for All and the attacks that he and some of his predecessors had created. Izuku had not inherited that quirk, but that had not prevented him to take inspiration for a personal attack. His own personal way to thank the hero for his help. When the impact with the robot's head was imminent, Izuku charged his right arm backwards, focusing all the flames in his fist. When Izuku was a few inches from his target, he hit the robot with all his strength, shouting, "Hell Smash!" Upon impact, Izuku released all of his flames inside the robot, whose body quickly changed from dark green to brilliant white, before being destroyed by a series of violent explosions from the inside, with a final explosion that disintegrated it completely. But by then Izuku had already jumped down, landing without problems on the ground, creating several cracks around him. As what was left of the robot fell to the ground, Izuku heard the roar of his bike coming closer. Looking in that direction, he saw it with the girl still on the saddle, and if possible, her face had become even greener than before. With a low chuckle, he walked toward the bike until he stood beside it, ignoring Present Mick's voice as he screamed that time was up. "Looks like it's really over," said Izuku before stepping aside to allow the girl to run behind a piece of cement and throw up her breakfast, and who knows what else. Shaking his head, Izuku adjusted his mask and hood before returning to his human form. Approaching the girl who had just finished throwing up, he put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay? The girl looked at him in confusion before nodding slowly. "Why, yeah, thanks for saving me. I are a Flaming Centaur?" Izuku chuckled a bit. "If you want to call me like that. Now that the exam is over, you should go to some doctor. Better be sure." And with that, we walked toward his bike before hearing, "I'm sorry." Looking back at the girl, he arched an eyebrow. "What? I'm sorry. If it was not for me, you could have accumulated more points," said the girl with a worried face, but Izuku waved his hand while shaking his head. "No problem. I'm not angry, and failing this exam will not change my life, so you do not have to worry," explained the young boy before mounting on his bike. "If you will be admitted, good luck with your career." Before she could say anything else, Izuku put his hands on the handlebars of the bike and left a few moments later, while many of the examinees were coming to the scene to see what had happened. Approaching the gate from which he had arrived, he could not hold back another sneeze. "Damn it. I wonder who is talking about me. If it's still Johnny, this is the right time to burn his chopper's wheels," thought Izuku without being able to know that. In a room at the UA, a series of heroes were intent on cheering with wide smiles on their lips, especially All Might. Johnny's house / 2 days later. Izuku was intent on arranging the drive chain of his Kawasaki when the garage door suddenly opened and a grinning Johnny appeared before him, holding a white envelope between 2 fingers. "There is a letter for you from the UA High School," said Johnny, handing the envelope to Izuku. "I wonder what it could be. Probably a thank you letter for participating in their exam, or something like that," guessed Izuku, catching the letter before walking toward his room. His bike was perfect now, so he could go take a shower, but first he wanted at least to see what was written in the letter. "All Might has not contacted me during these days. He is probably not happy with my performance during the exam. I hope he is not offended," thought Izuku before opening the envelope, finding, in addition to a sheet of paper, a strange metal disc. That small object fell on his desk, and a holographic screen materialized in front of him, with a close-up, maybe too close, of All Might, who was smiling at the camera. "Am I on screen?" shouted the man as the camera moved away to show the hero in full. "It took some time to jump through some hoops and get this done. So for not able to contact you sooner, that's my bad." After a bow, he looked back at the camera. I guess we'll be seeing a lot more of each other since it's been decided that I'll work at the UA. He'll be a teacher, thought Izuku before sweat dropping, since All Might was talking about post-production with the operator of the camera. Back to the main topic. You behaved very well during the practical test, but with a score of only 22 points, you have obviously failed the exam, said All Might with a serious voice. Izuku sighed, being aware of that fact, but hearing someone like All Might say it was not pleasant. But wait, there's more! Confused by those words, Izuku looked at the holographic screen as All Might showed another screen at his side. On that screen appeared the brown-haired girl that Izuku had saved from the giant robot. Well, excusez-moi. As soon as the exam ended, this little lady petitioned us directly. Why, you ask? Here's why. Sorry to bother you, but do you know the boy with the mask, the hoodie, and the motorbike? Flaming Centaur? The girl asked Present Mike, who was in front of her. That's me. No surprise here, thought Izuku with a raised eyebrow, not understanding why All Might was showing this to him. Would it be possible to share some of my points with him? She asked, shocking Izuku to the core. Wait a minute, he saved me and failed to earn more points. Oh no, don't tell me. Please, at least give him the points he lost because of me. No. Much more so than any Quirk, said All Might, looking again at the camera. It was your actions that touched the hearts of the judges. He then crossed his forearms in front of him, and they were looking at more than just smashing some robots for points. Having now guessed the meaning of the exam, Izuku was more than slightly pale. Did you think there would be an academy for heroes that rejects an entrant for doing the right thing? Perish the thought, he smiled even more at the camera. Think it's cheesy? Fine by me. It's in the job description. Laying your life on the line to do cheesy stuff. All Might pointed at another screen showing a ranking with 3 columns. Name of the examinee, villain points, and rescue points. Izuku paled even more in seeing his name at the top of the ranking, with 22 villain points and 60 rescue points, for a total of 82 points. Congratulations, young Midoriya. You passed, said All Might with a nod and the ever-present smile on his face. From now on, UA will be your hero academia. And with that, the projector went off by itself. After a full minute of silence, Izuku slammed the head on his desk with a loud groan. This is not possible. Sisso, said an amused voice at his left. Izuku's side glared at the intruder. His guardian Johnny, who was looking at him with a little grin and 2 bottles in his hands, champagne to celebrate your entry to the UA or sake. For the same reason, only in a negative way. Izuku glared at him for several seconds. I'll burn the wheels of your customized Harley-Davidson panhead. Johnny paled instantly. You would not dare. Izuku said nothing and went to the bathroom. Izuku, answer me. You wouldn't dare, right? Right. Izuku. Warning. Izuku will be a year older than the Izuku of the manga/anime. You knew it. All Might looked from the ocean to the boy next to him, showing an amused smile. I knew what? That the exam was not just about smashing those robots, said Izuku with a half glare. I had no chance to fail the exam. I told you this 10 months ago, right? Replied All Might without losing his smile. During these exams, the judges look at everything, and all of them should have been blind so as not to see your rescue of the young Uraraka. Izuku stared at him for several seconds. Fine? What now? Now? Well, you will begin your life as a student at UA, said All Might. However, you still have a few weeks before the start of the academic year. You should try to relax in the meantime. The young boy hummed a second before asking, what about my identity? During the exam, I had my face covered when I was in my normal form, but I cannot stay that way for the whole duration of the academy. No need to worry about that. All Might reassured him. In a few days, you will receive documents to fill out. Among them there is one concerning the privacy of each student. By signing that document, you agree not to disclose personal information regarding teachers, your classmates, and obviously other students. Obviously, you will be free to give your permission to disclose them, but without your consent, no one at UA can talk about your true identity. In case someone breaks that rule, he or she will be expelled or fired from the academy and placed under house arrest for 20 years. In your case, if you come to school by motorbike, you will be given a special parking from where you can reach the school without being seen. I see, said Izuku with a sigh. Well, at least there is a positive side in all this. Only one, thought All Might before asking. And that would be? Izuku looked at him with an emotionless face. I will be able to choose a name that I want, not one that has been given to me by journalists. All Might had a snort at that. I can understand. Flaming Centaur isn't exactly catchy. Do you already have something in mind? Right now, no. Something will come to mind when the time comes. Shrugged Izuku before walking toward his bike. I'll see you at the academy then, All Might. Indeed you will. Good night, young Midoriya, and good luck with the academy, said All Might looking at the younger boy's back. His smile seemed to expand at the thought of the class in which Izuku had been placed. After a short chuckle, he returned to look at the ocean. I'm sure this new generation of heroes will live up to their expectations. I can feel it. UA High School / 3 weeks later. Hey, this place is huge. They should put up signs to help the freshmen, thought Izuku walking in a hallway. The fact of being late, due to some complications with the parking for his bike, had not put him in a good mood, and now he could not even find the right class. What a nice way to start his first day at UA. Turning a corner, he finally saw the door he was looking for, and well, it was very difficult not to see it, since it was at least 4 meters high. This door is humongous. I wonder if there is someone in this school as tall as this door. He shook his head before placing a hand on the door to open it. I only hope that those two have been put in the other section. I have no desire to discuss with them. Izuku thought, opening the door with closed eyes, just to regret it after only a second. Don't put your legs on the desk. Don't you think that is disrespectful towards your classmates? No. As a matter of fact, I don't think so. Which middle school are you from anyway? Fucking Four Eyes? Before the bespectacled boy could answer, a loud "Oh hell no" echoed in the classroom as the door was closed violently. All the students turned to the door with confused looks, and a girl with plug-like earlobes, who was covering her ears with both hands, murmured, "The lessons haven't started yet, and I already have a headache." Great. Izuku could not help but send a curse to anyone who had divided the students between the two sections. There must have been about 40 students between both sections, and he had managed to end up with those two. To hell with UA, he would have preferred to fight against All Might every day rather than hearing those two for a single minute. Excuse me, is this the section 1A? Asked a female voice behind him, and upon looking behind his back, he saw the brown-haired girl from the exam walking toward him with a timid smile. I've been looking for my class for 10 minutes. This place is huge. She did not recognize me? Ah, yes, my face was covered. Izuku thought before nodding at her. Yes, it is this one. I just got here myself. Oh, thank you, said the girl, widening her smile. That means we will be classmates. By the way, I'm Achiko Uraraka. Nice to meet you. If you want to have a friendly conversation, go somewhere else, suddenly said a third voice, this time male, and as strange as it might sound, the voice came from the floor. Both Izuku and Achiko looked down, staring with dismay at a man with long black hair lying on the ground in a yellow sleeping bag. Not at all shaken by their looks, the man took out a juice from the sleeping bag and drank it in a single sip. This is Department of Heroics, not a bar to chat with friends. Who the hell is this guy? Thought the two aspiring heroes with a sweat drop as the man stood up while remaining in the sleeping bag. What are you doing here? You should be in the classroom, said the man with half-open eyes. I'm not sure, but I guess you're a teacher, said Izuku, raising a hand. I would like to know if it is still possible to change section. Achiko looked at him with surprised eyes. Why do you want to change it already? I would like to know it too, said the man with no reaction. I'm the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, Shota Aizawa. Izuku simply pointed at the door. After you, sensei? Arching an eyebrow, Shota walked slowly towards the door and then began to open it. You want to end me? Are you sure you want to become a hero with that temper? Fuck you for eyes. Get out of my way, or I'll seriously hurt you. Just to close it instantly. Maybe I still have time to get the other section assigned to me, said Shota without moving away from the door. Please take me with you, sensei, added Izuku with an almost pleading voice. Behind them, Achiko could only sweat drop. With a loud sigh, Shota opened the door again. Unfortunately, we don't have time. Life is short, kids. An optimistic guy. Undoubtedly, thought Izuku and Achiko walking into class with him, while all the students stopped talking after seeing the man enter. Izuku did not even have to turn around to feel Bakugo's eyes on him, but luckily, he did not have to think about it too much because, after introducing himself to the rest of the class, Shota pulled a blue t-shirt out of the sleeping bag, handing it to Izuku. You will find a uniform like this in front of your personal locker in the locker room. Go and put them on, and then go to the P grounds, ordered Shota without emotion in his voice. Izuku sighed slightly and headed for the locker rooms with the rest of the class. doing his best to ignore Jack's furious gaze. I really hope I can change section, he thought with another sigh. Well, I might as well see what Aizawa-sensei wants us to do. I just hope he doesn't force us to use our quirks. UA High School. Teacher's room / in the meantime. UA's system is aberrant. Thought All Might reading the Academy's regulation with the various advantages offered to teachers and students depending on the homeroom teacher. Even today, they might be expelled. Morning, mighty boy, shouted someone behind him. I see you're already studying the regulation yet. Present, Mike, said All Might, looking at him with a calm face and a nod, something like that. I noticed that several rules have changed since I was a student here. Oh yeah, our furry boss has changed many rules in recent years. Some are absolutely crazy, said Present Mike with a grin while sitting in front of All Might. By the way, I found out what you wanted to know, mighty boy. It seems like the homeroom teacher of Class 1A is my old classmate, Aizawa. All Might cringed at that. Oh boy, looks like they are really in for it with this guy. And speaking of those young listeners, in that class, there is the boy recommended by you, asked Present Mike, pointing both index fingers at his fellow hero, the one who literally ignited the entrance exam. Flaming Centaur, correct? All Might sighed. Yes, that's him. I just hope there are no problems between him and his classmates. From what I have seen, he was put in the same class as young Katsuki, the boy who arrived second in the exam, and they do not seem to get along very well. Present Mike raised an eyebrow at his words. Shouldn't you be more worried about what Aizawa will do with that class? Last year, he expelled a whole class of students during the first day of school. You know, this time, All Might showed a strange grin at the English teacher. Young Midoriya will not be expelled. Today they will have the test, right? I'm sure he will exceed Aizawa's expectations. Present Mike grinned as well. Oh, I got shivers down my spine. UA High School. P ground / shortly after. A Quirk apprehension test. A fucking course, thought Izuku with his eye twitching in annoyance. He had hoped to spend the first day without too much trouble, and instead this test would have forced him to show his quirk to everyone. He could already hear Bakugo's imprecations followed by a long series of questions from his classmates. Those not scared by his appearance or his fame, at least. What about the ceremony on the first day? Asked Achiko, confused by this development. Given that on the documents he had signed it was indicated that, during the first day, there would be no real lessons, but a ceremony and other things soon after. If you want to be heroes, we don't have time for frilly niceties, said Shoto without looking back now that he was out of his sleeping bag. We teachers have many freedoms, and this is one of them. Turning to the students, many of whom were confused by his words, he showed them a softball pitch, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, endurance running, grip strength tests, sustained sideways jumps, upper body exercises, seated toe touch. These are all activities you all know from middle school. Physical tests where you were barred from using your quirks. Thanks to the negligence of our government, we have no way of recording the data we need before the academy. Shota then looked at Bakugo, being tired of the looks he was shooting at Izuku Katsuki. How far could you pitch a softball in middle school? Bakugo looked at him with a raised eyebrow. 67 meters. Shota threw the ball at the blonde. Try using your quirk this time. As long you don't exit the circle. Anything you do is fine, and don't hold back. Bakugo weighed the ball with one hand and assumed a throwing position inside the circle on the ground. I'll just add a blast to the pitch. Before throwing the ball into the sky with the help of an explosion in his hand die. The other students watched in amazement at the ball flying in the sky until they saw it fall to the ground far from them. Before anything else, you must know what you're capable of. After a few seconds, Shota turned to them showing a cell phone on which was shown 705.2 m. This is a rational metric that will form the basis of your hero foundation. Wow, awesome. That looks so fun. More than 700 meters? Incredible. So, we can use our course now? Now we're talking. As the students voiced their thoughts, Shota's face grew darker with every single comment, and only Izuku seemed to notice it. It looks fun, you say? Repeated the black-haired man without looking at them. So you were planning to spend 3 years here having a good old time? What happened to becoming heroes? Shota looked at them, making them wince with his glare. All right then, new rule. The student who rank last in total points will be judged hopeless and instantly expelled. That is a threat with a capital T, but can he really do that? Thought Izuku just when Shota showed them a creepy smile. Our freedom means that we can expel students whenever we want to. Well, that answers my question, but this is our first day here, shouted Achiko. That's just too unreasonable. Shota sighed, running a hand through his hair. Natural disasters, massive accidents, ego-mad villains. These are just a few examples of what could happen at any time. The whole world is now submerged in what could be described as unreasonable, and that's our job as heroes. To reverse it all and restore reason. This is not an academy where you can take it easy. For the next 3 years, as long as you survive, you will always be faced with increasingly harder tests, and you will always have to give more than 100%. He grinned at them. This is Plus Ultra. I expect you to overcome those trials and climb to the top. As the students reflected on his words, Shota explained that the various tests would be carried out mostly in pairs, after which he began to call the various students. Remaining on the sidelines, Izuku looked closely at the various quirks put on display by his classmates, noting how some of them were more suited to certain situations, such as the bespectacled guy who had something like engines integrated into the calves. When his name was called, Izuku mentally cursed to see that he had to take the 50-meter dash with Bakugo. However, instead of going to the starting point, he approached the teacher, who looked at him with a knowing look. If you're wondering if I'm aware of your quirk, the answer is yes. I know everything there is to know, so do not hesitate to use it. Also, as much as it influences objects you come in contact with, you will not be allowed to use your vehicle. Izuku nodded and approached Bakugo, his heart beating slightly faster. With a loud sigh, he looked at the spot where he was supposed to start the dash. I might as well take this weight off my shoulders. In a blaze of flames, all the students gasped as those flames devoured his flesh, showing white bones not at all affected by the heat or fire. When most of the flames were dispersed, mostly staying around his bones, Izuku turned slowly toward them, noting that most of them were watching him with eyes full of surprise and fear, though some were strangely excited at the sight of his appearance. Shrugging, he positioned himself next to Bakugo, noting how the blonde was looking at him with wide eyes and clenched teeth. Deku, what the fuck is that? How can you have a quirk? You're a fucking quirkless bike nerd. Hissed Bakugo, gritting his teeth even more when Izuku ignored him completely. Answer me, fucking nerd. Now that I think about it, I have never tested the speed of my quirk. I have always moved using my bike, and during my fights I never realized how fast I was going. Thought Izuku, cracking his neck. Time to find out. Not far from them, he raised a hand, signaling to get ready. When he quickly lowered it, Izuku simply jerked forward with all the strength that his quirk could give him. The result was surprising, but not anomalous, because during all the tests he had conducted with his quirk, Izuku had understood that his power made him extremely strong, but the same could not be said about his speed. As expected by him, after the initial burst of velocity, his speed began to drop, making him still reach the finish line after only 3.25 seconds. Not the fastest, but still faster than Bakugo, who arrived shortly after him, using the explosions produced by his hands as propellers, marking a time of 4.13 seconds. Midoriya, can't you do anything for your feet? Asked Shota with the same calm voice, pointing behind Izuku, who, after looking back, saw flames where he had placed his feet. Can't say that I can. My flames do as they want most of the time. Also, those flames will last only a few seconds, explained Izuku with a shrug. Shota nodded before calling the students who still had to take the 50-meter dash test. However, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Bakugo walking towards Izuku with a face contorted with rage. Fucking nerd! What the fuck was that? Shouted Bakugo with a glare. Izuku looked at him without, well, blinking. My quirk. That's not your quirk. You don't have a quirk. You're quirkless. I was quirkless when I was 4. That's different, said Izuku with another shrug. Why you dash? Bakugo charged at him, creating small explosions in his right hand, but then a white cloth blocked both his arms, forcing him to stop. If I were you, I would not try to resist since I erased your quirk, said Shota with his eyes now blood red. Also, try again to attack your classmate, and you will be the one to be expelled. Bakugo gritted his teeth but nodded anyway, shooting a last glare at Izuku. Closing his eyes to undo the effect of his quirk, Shota turned to the other students. We're wasting time. Prepare for the next trial. Remaining apart from the rest of the students, Izuku continued to wait his turn, noting, however, that Achiko and the eyeglasses boy, whose name was Tenya Ida, from time to time turned their eyes to him and looked as if they were undecided about what to do. Without thinking too much about it, he continued to perform the various tests remaining in his skeletal form, and, thanks to the various devices used by the school, Izuku managed to understand some limits of his quirk. During the grip strength test, he He had destroyed the device to measure the force when he had reached 2 tons, shocking his classmates since the second highest score was 540 kilos scored by Mizo Shoji, a boy with strange tentacle-like limbs. However, that result was overshadowed after the upper body exercises, where Izuku had lifted over 20 tons using a special rod that became heavier over time. Although Izuku somehow knew he could lift a lot more, he had decided to stop to avoid more problems in the future. With the seated toe touch test, he had roughly surpassed everyone thanks to his lack of flesh, even if the frog girl, Tsuyu Azui, had managed to equal him thanks to her incredible elasticity, followed closely by Mashireo Ojiro, a normal boy but with a big tail, and Yugo Aoyama, who seemed to be stubborn with being elegant in every situation. With the standing long jump, he was placed in the first half of the class despite having used his flames as propellers forward, a technique used at the same time by Bakugo and mimed in one way or another by those who had a quirk suitable for the test. Achiko, however, had earned the first position thanks to her quirk which had annulled her gravity, allowing her to make a very long jump. Just that quirk had granted her an infinity as a result of the softball pitch, leaving the other students in disbelief, while Izuku had arrived second with a launch of over 3 kilometers. During the endurance running, he had been stopped by Shota after the 20th lap of the sports field. The teacher had told him that they did not have the whole day to find out what was the limit of his stamina, and the fact that Izuku was not at all tired was a clear sign of his resistance. Needless to say that even in that test, he had scored more points, while Tenya had arrived behind him but managed to finish only a dozen laps. The test of the sustained sideways jumps, Izuku had shown to have an excellent coordination, managing to overcome most of his classmates even if, strangely, the shortest of the class, Minoru Mineta, was able to make more sideways jumps thanks to his low stature that guaranteed a lower center of gravity and therefore more controllable. However, Minoru was now sweating like a turkey during Thanksgiving in America. Having obtained an optimal score only in a test out of 8, it was quite presumable that he was in the last position. Even those who had a quirk unsuitable for all tests, such as a completely invisible girl named Toru Hagakure, had managed to make more points than he did. After the last test, Shota called all the students in front of him, while typing on the screen of a small device used to show the individual results. When even Izuku, now back in human form, was near the other students, the teacher said, "All right, time for the results." And with a tap on the screen, a holographic ranking began to appear in front of the students. Oh yeah, that whole expulsion thing was a lie. Silence reigned supreme as the students looked at their teacher with surprised and speechless faces. Seeing their expressions, Shota grinned and added, "It was a logical ruse to pull out your best performances." WHAT. Half the class screamed as Minoru was about to have a cardiac arrest. "Come on guys, use your brains." "Of course it was just a ruse," said a tall girl with black hair. Momo Yorozu, if Izuku recalled right. "Easy for you to say, when you were not risking like me," shouted Minoru, pointing at the ranking, and sure enough, he was in last place while Izuku was at the top of the ranking, much to Bakugo's ire. "Right tight. With that, the test is over. Your curriculum sheets are back in the classroom, so give them a once-over," said Shota, walking away. "And do not be late. The day is not over yet." While the students walked towards the locker rooms, Shota went directly to the main building, but as soon as he had turned the corner, he found himself next to one of his colleagues. "Aizawa, you liar." "Oh, it's All Might," said Shota, not at all surprised. "You were watching, I take it? You must be free then. I arrived a few seconds ago. Just in time to see the ranking," said All Might with a thumbs up. "But anyway, a logical ruse? April's Fool was a week ago, you know? You expelled an entire class of first graders last year. Today, however, you have shown a completely opposite behavior." All Might pointed at him. "You felt it too, right? The potential that these young heroes possess, especially young Midoriya." Shota looked at him for a second. "Their chances are above the 0 mark, so I won't expel them until they reach that point. It makes no sense to keep alive a dream that will never come true." He started to walk, but then stopped. "All right, about Midoriya, what about him? A while ago, Katsuki tried to attack him, but I stopped him using my cloth and my quirk," said Shota with a strange voice. Midoriya was right behind him, and I could clearly see him. "What are you getting at, Aizawa?" asked All Might, having never heard that voice from the fellow pro hero. In his voice was clearly distinguishable his concern for something, and if something worried someone like Shota, I do not know what it is, but whatever it is. Shota looked back at him. his eyes clearly showing his concern. I couldn't erase it with my quirk. UA High School / a few hours later. Izuku yawned loudly, covering his mouth with one hand. The first day of school was over, and he felt incredibly tired. Not only he had to show everyone his quirk, but during the lunch break, he had been bombarded with questions from many of his classmates, especially that pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido. As soon as he heard her talk, Izuku thought she was under the effect of some sugar or caffeine intoxication. Hey, wait! Upon hearing the voice of Tenya, he turned to confront his classmate, who had not spoken to him all day. Quite strange considering his way of doing somewhat particular. Midoriya. Today I could not tell you, because I did not know how to say it, but I would like to tell you that during the entrance exam you were the best man, said Tenya with a tone of voice fast but precise. Say what? You had somehow more experience of us, seeing your past as a vigilante, but nevertheless you were the only one to understand the true meaning of the exam, by saving Uraraka. For this, you proved yourself to the best man, and I cannot help but be ashamed of myself for not having noticed, explained the younger boy while clenching his fists. Should I tell him that I did not know anything about the rescue points? Thought Izuku with a sweat drop, but when he was about to answer, from behind Tenya, Achiko came with a shy smile on her face. Hi Midoriya. I know you're going home, but I wanted to thank you for saving me during the exam, and I'm sorry for not having thanked you before, said the girl before bowing in front of the older boy who felt strangely uncomfortable. No need to thank me, Uraraka. After all, by saving you I managed to be admitted, said Izuku with a little smile, while thinking, unfortunately, I should have imagined there were rescue points. Uraraka, I am dismayed that I did not help you during the exam, said Tenya bowing to Achiko, who blushed a bit. Why, you should not apologize. Nobody knew, and that giant robot was quite threatening. Izuku seemed almost amused by the current situation, and before he knew it, he was already walking out of the school with Tenya and Achiko, talking about their first day at the academy and other things, including Izuku's past, but he had already drawn lines on what he was willing to reveal. When they were in front of the train station, he froze suddenly, staring wide-eyed at the huge clock in the station. Midoriya, are you okay? Asked Tenya with concern in his voice, as he and Achiko looked at the older boy. No, I'm not okay. I forgot something at school. What did you forget? A pencil? A notebook? Your cell phone? The bespectacled boy hypothesized some of the things that could be forgotten, but none of his hypotheses could even hope to get closer to Izuku's response. My motorcycle, UA High School / the next day. So normal, was the common thought of most students in the class, as President Mike wrote a sentence in English on the blackboard, asking them to identify the mistake. Obviously, some had slightly different thoughts, such as Bakugo, who was about to fall asleep due to boredom. He had enrolled in that academy to become a hero. For God's sake. He had already spent 5 years of complete boredom during middle school with those damn subjects. Behind him, Izuku was taking notes as he was not bothered to study some normal stuff, an aspect of his character that he had never lost during his childhood, even though his passion for motorcycles had brought him several times to study for a short time, so as to spend some time in Johnny's shop. Ordinary subjects in the morning, then lunch break, and in the afternoon we have foundational heroic studies. Thought Izuku looking at the blackboard. It would seem almost like a normal school. Who knows the answer? Everybody hands up and raise them high. Almost. Despite the particular behavior of some teachers, Izuku still struggled to understand how a heroine named 18+ only Hero Midnight could be a teacher in a school of minors. The morning passed serenely, and the young hero in training seemed to regain his good mood during the lunch break when he tasted one of the spiciest foods present. Thanks to his quirk, spicy or hot foods did not bother him, and over the years he had discovered he was madly in love with spicy Mexican peppers. Another rather relaxing moment had come out of nowhere when one of his classmates, Eijiro Kirishima, had challenged him to eat a whole hot pepper. Izuku had eaten his without any repercussions. Eijiro had been taken to the infirmary for second-degree burns on the tongue. Another thing that Izuku had noticed since the morning had been the change of his classmates towards him. If the day before, many of them were not particularly enthusiastic about being close to him, now they were all trying to talk to him in a normal way, especially thanks to Achiko and Tenya, who treated him like a normal person. Of the whole class, only 2 people still kept their distance from him. Bakugo, for reasons all too obvious, and Shoto Todoroki, a very cold boy, and not just because of his quirk, who always seemed on guard when he was near Izuku, especially when the older boy was in his skeletal form. Shaking his head, not to think about that strange detail, Izuku looked at the door of the classroom with less enthusiasm than the others. After all, he had fought dozens and dozens of villains for almost 3 years, so there was not much he could surprise him regarding the heroic part of the studies. I only hope that our teacher is not another hero with strange tendencies. It's me, and here I can say goodbye to my last bit of hope. I entered through the door like a normal person, shouted All Might walking toward the teacher desk before taking up a pose, Foundational Hero Studies. For this class, we'll build up you hero foundation through various trials. He then turned to the class, showing a card with the battle written on it. Let's jump right in with this. The Trial of Battle. Upon hearing his words, the class seemed to be animated by new life, especially Bakugo, who had a crazy light in his eyes. And to go with your first battle, All Might picked up a small remote control, and after pressing a button, a wall of the class began to move, showing glass cases with large numbered containers. We've prepared the gear required by you to match your quirks. Our battle gear. Awesome. I can't wait to wear my costume. Izuku picked up the container with his superhero costume, noting the black belt with the skull-shaped buckle. A slight grin formed on his lips. Perhaps that lesson could be interesting after all. Get changed and we'll be ready to go. Everyone gather at Grounds Beta, said All Might, pointing at the door with a smile. The garb you bring into the battlefield is vitally important, boys and girls. And remember, all the students turned to him, eager to hear what he wanted to say to them. From here on out, you're all officially heroes. Omake, it's me. Shaking his head, not to think about that strange detail, Izuku looked at the door of the classroom with less enthusiasm than the others. After all, he had fought dozens and dozens of villains for almost 3 years, so there was not much he could surprise him regarding the heroic part of the studies. I only hope that our teacher is not another hero with strange tendencies. Say me, and here I can say goodbye to my last bit of hope. Mario, what? Much to everyone's confusion, a very short man with brown hair, a mustache, and a red hat entered the room, jumping with a raised fist and then landing on the teacher's desk. Mamma mia, what an amazing class. Today I'm here to teach you how to save princesses in danger. And after another jump, he walked toward the door. Come on, follow me. Let's say go. After he left the classroom, a disturbing silence fell on the students, and only after several minutes, Tenya asked a question to the others. I know it sounds weird, but that white powder that Lunch Rush uses for cooking is flour, right? Nobody could give him an answer.
Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.